book, The Anti-Semite Next Door. This is a fictional account, a story that certainly has a lot of, unfortunately, in a way, nonfiction relevance to what's going on right now. Mark is the principal host of the Justice Counts podcast. He's an op-ed writer. He's written several of these fictional novels. Mark, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
Well, Mark, my first question to you is sort of as a fellow writer, and I'm not a fiction writer. In fact, my daughter told me to forget about it when I tried. But I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your process because you've created these amazing characters and you've developed these amazing scenarios and plots.
Well, I've been asked that question before, and it's going to sound a little silly.
Yeah.
Um, the I never fashioned myself as a novelist. What happened is I handled a case early in my career um, where a couple of kids got molested by a Catholic priest,
Hmm.
and as the case developed, and as the church dug in and lied and um, hid evidence and did all kinds of nasty things that you would not expect from a religious institution,
Yes,
I said to myself, wow, this would make an interesting book.
indeed.
And we're talking now the early 1980s. So I'm
Right.
30 years old. And some 30, 40 years later, I finally sit down and say, okay, let's write this non-fictional account of what happened, similar to, I guess, what you do, Charles. And it wasn't coming together. It for lack of a better way to say it, it was boring.
Right.
And I found it much more entertaining internally to um, fictionalize it,
Yes.
embellish it, and create a whole different lawyer and a whole different account of what happened.
Hmm.
I decided, for instance, not to mention the word Catholic in the book. I felt that these kinds of incidents, although they've been a scandal for the Catholic Church, can happen anywhere,
Oh, yeah, it's much more
and
universal.
I didn't want the book to pick on anybody. So
No.
it's pretty transparent in the book, which is called, by the way, Betrayal of Faith. That's my first novel.
Right. And,
It's
you know, in
pretty
a way,
obvious that
like
I'm
doing a
thinking of the Catholic Church, but I don't mention that in the book.
no, that's interesting. And also doing a fiction allows you to maybe say a few things that you can't say in a nonfiction, maybe not
No
only for
question.
legal reasons, but just it allows you to kind of open the lens and really, flesh out a topic without worrying about facts,
No,
I
no question.
suppose.
But anyway, I don't want to make
Yeah.
this a longer
No,
story
no,
than
I want to talk
necessary.
about your present book because it deals with an issue related to my own book, which just was released last week, The Anti-Semitic Imagination. Um, and it comes at a time when there's been a major uptick in anti-Semitism in this country and in the world in response to the Hamas slaughter of over 1,000 Israelis, both Jewish and non, I may point out, on October 7th of this year, something that has really changed the entire infrastructure within the state of Israel, but within the Jewish community as well. And the response to this from a certain segment, I mean, although Israel certainly has found a lot of friends and supporters around the world and in this country, which is understated. But yet, on the far left in this country, you have anti Israel sentiments that were expressed pretty much immediately following that brutal attack. So I guess I'd ask you, Mark, as someone who's been an activist and a novelist, what do you think accounts for that?
Well, I'm going to answer that question, but I want to finish my answer to the first question.
Please.
Um, I didn't fashion myself as a novelist. I just wanted to write a book about that experience.
Okay.
And when I finished it, I thought I was a one and done author. And then certain things started to happen in America. I notice you have a Trump banner behind you.
Indeed. I
We,
love
we have
Trump.
we have different political philosophies, you and I. But
Understood.
putting that aside, I started writing more novels that related to things that were happening in America.
Great.
And I don't have a process to answer your question. It's just something happens in America, and I start writing, and a book comes out of it. So that's the completion of the answer to your first question.
Okay. And
To
I
your
think
second,
that's actually typical of a lot of people who do write. It kind of builds up, and then there's certain things that we experience in the country and in society, and it all sort of falls onto the page. It just kind of
I
develops.
find truth more amazing than fiction.
Right.
So I tend to write about events that happen in America, and most of my novels are related or pulled from headline news that has
Hmm.
happened over the period of time from the first book, 2016, to today. As to your second question,
Yes.
I think what we have, frankly, is a country that has continuously been anti Semitic. And I don't think anti Semitism is anything new. I just think it's been in the closet. And um, the last several years, where we pit left against right and Jew against Gentile and uh, Islam against Jew and Islam against America and the various this person or politically different political differences are now something we fight over rather than try to negotiate. I think all of that contributes to the atmosphere we're in now, where
Hmm.
anti-Semitism has come out of the closet.
Right. It's
The
almost
interesting
become
thing about
fashionable
this
in
is
some
I
circles.
wrote the book
Yeah.
and finished it before the war began. I didn't write it in response to the war. I wrote it in response to incidents like um, Charleston and things where, with all due respect, the president of the United States says there's good people on both sides. Things like
Oh,
that.
just for the record, I want to tell you that that was a hoax. But anyway,
Maybe it may be. I don't
yeah.
want to get into a political
I know
argument
I
with
don't
you,
either, but we have
but
to just put that in a little context and note that the
okay.
enemies of Trump,
When
extracted a statement within a sentence, and then they put it up the flagpole as a way to try to attack Trump and his followers. And
well,
it
there,
created
there's a
division and unnecessarily just for political purposes.
yeah, I saw a video, so I
Did you
believe
see
what I
the
saw with my
entire?
own eyes.
Did you see the entire statement
No,
by
no,
President?
no. I don't. They
Because it
don't show.
wasn't available.
Absolutely, they don't show. They
Well,
show it.
that's my point. I mean, it was sliced and diced in a way to try to gain political
Okay,
points against Trump
I
in the worst way by trying to fan those kinds of flames
I won't
of
debate that with you.
okay.
That happens on both sides. The
No, I don't know about that either, but go anyway.
but the issue for
Yeah,
me
yeah.
was um, it seems that not only is it uh, something that is fashionable in America, for lack of a better way to say it,
Yes.
but it's also um, much easier for an anti-Semite to come out and say bad things. And then Israel comes along, Hamas comes along, uh, slaughters 1,200 innocent people by crossing a country's border, and protesters come out of the college campuses and start blaming the victim,
Why?
which
Why
blows
do you
my
think?
mind.
I mean, these are people who generally support the victims. So what's going on with that?
Anti-Semitism.
You
It's the
know, I mean,
kind of
look, I agree
anti-Semitism.
with your thesis. I mean, anti-Semitism is always there, but I differentiate between what I would call normal anti-Semitism, which I'm not endorsing or condoning, and weaponized anti-Semitism. Normal anti-Semitism is the same sort of emotion we have of envy toward our neighbor who we think has something we don't have. You know, the guy down the street has a bigger house than we have, a nicer car than we have, a prettier wife than we have.
A
You know,
better
and we
job.
look at
A
that
better job. A
and it
better
creates
job.
resentment and envy. That's normal anti-Semitism because we imagine that the Jew is more successful somehow, and we that it makes us look within, and we view that in a conspiracy sense. Oh, they're taking advantage. It's a Marxist idea too, like that anyone who's more successful is so because they've exploited someone who's less successful. And that's kind of a normal reaction. And the best way to handle that, I think, is through love and compassion and reaching out and making human contact with people. But anti Semitism becomes weaponized when it's either endorsed implicitly or openly by governments, or when it's endorsed by major institutions in society, and it's actually fanned for reasons that are interesting and sometimes varied. You know, it's like a scapegoat context, that it's the Jew who is involved in whatever it is that we're doing, but we don't want you to know about. So we're gonna turn everyone's attention to the shiny object. And I think that's what's going on, frankly, in the Arab world and the Islamic world. They've got these miserable oligarchies that are corrupt as hell and that are ripping the population off. But instead of having people focus on those corrupt governments, they turn the attention to Israel. Look at the Jews. They're behind everything. It's their fault. They're behind all of the miseries that we experience. It gets to the point of the absurd. I mean, for example, in Tunisia, there was shark bites on the beach, and they blamed Israel. Now, a rabbi in Israel, a cartoonist in Israel, actually created a really funny illustration showing sharks with yarmulkes. But I'm just pointing this out because it's like it gets right. I mean, it gets ridiculous, and it's all to try to blame someone else for the problem, and it only becomes problematic, really, even though it's not good anyway, when governments are behind it, when big media gets behind it, when big institutions like academia, culture, they get behind something like that. And they often do so for very nefarious, usually always do it for nefarious reasons. And it's not just anti-Semitism. We could say it's people who are, are racist, or any targeting of any minority as to raise kind of those sort of suspicions that people naturally have toward, quote, the other, by weaponizing it and using it.
I agree with most of that.
Yeah.
I have not seen, whether I'm a Democrat or whether I'm a Republican, I have not seen the government, especially Biden's government, um, support anything that Hamas has done. I
Oh no,
have
they've been
seen.
very good.
I
I
have
agree with
seen.
you.
Well, but I mean, fair is fair. I
Yeah.
mentioned that I'm not a Trump fan, but I'm also not a Rashida Tlaib fan.
Right.
Rashida Tlaib is a congresswoman. For those of your listeners who don't know her, she's a congresswoman who is in the next district over from my district in Michigan.
In Michigan, exactly. Yeah.
And through gerrymandering, the district that used to be southern, the southern suburbs of Detroit, um, southwest of Detroit, which included Dearborn,
Right.
became part of the district that includes some Jewish districts just northeast of Detroit,
Right.
a district that includes Southfield and Oak Park, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Those districts have a lot of Jewish people in them. used to be predominantly Jewish, less so now. But Tlaib has quite a few Jewish constituents. And what bothers me about her, among among a lot of things that bother me about her, um, but what bothers me about people like her is if she's a Palestinian or an Arab who supports Palestinian rights, that's certainly her right and privilege. We have free speech in this country, and she can support and believe whoever she wants, even if they're terrorists, I suppose.
Right.
But what she can't do, in my opinion, is represent a constituency that includes a melting pot of American citizens and just pick one constituency of her district and say, I'm with them. And going further,
Right.
she said the famous words, from the river to the sea, which means
Yeah.
she also supports the abolition of the Jewish people in Israel.
That's right.
And to me, that's just a bridge too far, crazy, and she deserved the censuring that she got. So
Yes.
I'm kind of a guy that calls them as I see them.
No, look, I mean, I agree with you about Rashida Tlaib, and
babies
I
and
also
citizens, babies and
Sis-
seniors get slaughtered in an attack.
yeah,
They behead women and rape them, and somehow that's a supportable position.
yeah. Where are the
Nonsense.
feminists, by the way, on that one?
Nonsense.
Yeah. No, and look, I certainly agree with you on Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, also from Minnesota. However, they don't even bother me as much as some of the other members of the squad who, because at least she is Palestinian and she does have some skin in the game. Same thing with Omar. She's Muslim. I get
Correct.
that. I don't agree with it, of course. I would argue with them. I hope that they can become a bit more enlightened. But what really bugs me are the other squad members who are neither Jewish or Palestinian, and who in New York, what's her face, AOC, and
Mhm.
them, and they're all and these college professors who are neither Jewish or Palestinian, or some of them actually are Jewish, and which makes it even worse. And they're doing the river to the sea business. I mean, and that's something that's a major shift. I haven't seen that quite that blatant before, and also a lot of younger people, who really don't know what they're doing. I mean, I've talked to several of them, including people have proximity to my own family, who are saying this stuff, and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. It's
Correct.
fashionable. They see it on TikTok. They think, oh, they want to be in with the cool people, and they want to be part of the beautiful people and get invited to parties. They don't understand what that means.
Well,
They're
there's
ignorant.
some truth to that, and
Yeah.
I want to go a little further because I want to, obviously you and I are not going to agree politically,
Right.
but what I want to take it out of politics for a
Okay.
second. Let's talk about religious worship for a second.
Hmm.
With a name like Moskowitz, I'm going to presume that you're a member of the tribe like I am.
Indeed.
Bello does not come out and scream Jew, but
No,
but trust
I
but
assume you're
trust me,
Italian.
but trust me, I am. It's
Okay.
it's shortened Russian, I think.
I get it.
But I've attended a lot of religious services in synagogue and in temples. I have yet to hear a rabbi ever call for the death of anyone, including Jewish enemies.
Oh yeah, no, I agree.
Never.
Of course not.
If you go to a Muslim mosque, a local imam in Detroit denounced Israel, not the Hamas terrorists, and said they left fire in our hearts that will burn until that state's demise. That's a that's a not an exact quote,
It's
but
pretty close. Yeah.
it is close to what he said.
Oh yeah. No, I don't doubt that.
He's calling for the demise of the Jewish people.
Right. And
He's
to use the term burning, I mean that brings up the Holocaust.
Now he doesn't speak for all imams. He
Right.
doesn't speak for all Muslims. I'm not going to attribute his language to anybody other than him, but I will point out that I've never heard, and I've attended a lot of services in a lot of states. When I was saying your side for my father, and I was traveling, I kept going to services in different places, and it was an interesting experience. But I challenge anybody to find a Jewish rabbi who was ever called for the demise or the death of a mass number of citizens.
Oh,
And
I absolutely would too.
that's something that differentiates, in my opinion, uh, from those that would argue that Israel, quote, has gone too far, unquote, or something like that,
Right.
uh, versus supporting a terrorist organization that walked into someone else's country and murdered 1,200 people. Uh, what I'd like to ask some of these students, if you're talking to them, because I'm not,
I am, yes.
ask them what their reaction would be if they were around when um, people from Arab countries slammed planes into the World Trade Center.
It's of course,
What's
and
their
look,
answer to that?
what they're into is not it's not rational, and the idea of referring to Israel's response in Gaza as genocide is very, very offensive and inflammatory. I mean, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they'd drop a big fat bomb on the place, but instead they send their young men and women into Gaza at great personal risk and at great sacrifice so that they don't kill innocent people,
And
so that they have to find the
leaflets warning that it's
combatants.
coming.
The what?
And I mean, who does that? They send leaflets and say, if
Yeah.
you're innocent, get the hell out of here.
And they're going in and trying to find the combatants who are dressed in civilian clothes against international law. And in the process, innocent people are killed. It's a war. But they're not going into a rock concert in order to kill young people. That's not the point. It's to basically stop the missiles from being fired into Israel and to find those missiles and destroy them.
Yep.
It's really a military operation that's in response to aggression. I mean, Gaza could have lived peaceably alongside Israel. I mean, I just had a guest on my show who's a radical, I would describe him as a radical Islamist. And I mentioned that to him and I said, look, Israel evacuated Gaza and they literally made it ethnically cleansed of Jews. They pulled Jews out, in some cases forcibly. And they returned it to the Palestinian Authority, or they gave it to the Palestinian Authority. There was a lot of money pouring in from all over the world, including the American taxpayer. And Israel was trying to support the development of their local security agency. And they had every opportunity to create a peaceful sovereign state there that would have, Israel was prepared to do a lot more. And their expectations were very simple. It was just to have a peaceful border, nothing more and nothing less. And instead, Hamas took over Gaza. They killed about 200 Arabs, and then they launched thousands of missiles into the state of Israel, not to mention the terror tunnels and the gas balloons, and eventually the hang gliders with machine guns. And my guest responded by saying, well, first of all, Gaza was like a prison camp. And I'm like, no, not only after they started firing missiles, they had the opportunity to be peaceful. And then he said, and also Gaza has an obligation to return Arabs to Palestine, quote unquote. In which case, my response is, look, I rest my case. It wasn't interested in peaceably living alongside Israel. It was used as a launching pad to destroy Israel. And by the way, I don't think that's necessarily the sentiment of your average Palestinian. I know this is anecdotal, but I worked at a spice factory for a summer near Gaza. My cousin happens to run it, and I was visiting. And about half of the employees were Palestinians who had come in from Gaza, and I got to know them. Now it's strictly anecdotal, but my sense of this was that they admired Israel. They wanted to be like Israel. They wanted an independent Gaza, which I totally agreed with, but they wanted it to be peaceful and have a good relationship with Israel.
Right.
I think that is your average Palestinian. I think, unfortunately, their leadership is doesn't see it that way. They want to destroy Israel. They just view it as cannon fodder of them and using it as a launching pad. And for some weird reason, which we'll never know,
Well,
Yitzhak Rabin invited
it's
Arafat
interesting.
from exile and he put him in charge of the Palestinian Authority. We'll never know why he did that because he's dead, unfortunately. But that really started a lot of the trouble because they could have brought in or allowed to develop more peaceable, more enlightened Palestinian Arabs who were willing to have a say alongside Israel, but that didn't happen.
The problem though is that they keep accepting, for lack of a better way to say it, uh, terrorist regimes running their country, and
Yeah.
then the terrorists hide behind them, and and they cry when people get killed, uh, when they're being used as human shields.
Right. I agree.
Don't blame Israel for that. Blame your government, your own
Yeah, and
government.
they're using them as just for propaganda. They say, "Oh, look at the Jews; they're killing people," when in fact they're using them as Israel says, as human shields.
Somebody sent me an Einstein quote. You
Yeah.
probably heard it, but I thought it was really appropriate to what's going on today. Um, he said, "If my theory of relativity is proven successful, German will claim me as a German, and France will declare me a citizen of the world. Should my theory prove untrue, France will say I'm a German, and Germany will declare I'm a Jew."
No, that's a good one. Exactly.
I
It
and
all depends on where you're coming from, right?
I think that's what's happening now. And by the way, if you think about it,
Yeah.
again, taking politics away from everything,
Right.
and even taking religion away,
Hmm.
the fact of the matter is that today's anti-Semitism coming out of the closet for is kind of my premise.
Yeah.
Um, is what my book is about. It's not anti-Muslim. It's not a response to the Israeli war. It's about the fact that the anti-Semite, today's anti-Semite, could be your neighbor, could be your coworker, could be the person in line with the grocery store with you.
Mhm.
There's more anti-Semitism in America than we ever thought there was. We thought it was something that happened in Nazi Germany. We thought it was
Right.
something that happened in Russia during the pogroms. We thought it was something that happens out in other places. It's happening right here in our own neighborhoods, and that's kind of what the book is about.
No, I mean, I think it's an important book. I tend to maybe take a little bit more of a glass half full view of this, in that I actually think that most Americans are not anti-Semitic. I think that a lot of this is cooked up by, first of all, there's a lot of Arab monies pouring into these universities. You look at Harvard and some of, especially the elite universities. I think it's a radical left, which is not the majority of Americans, has never made up more than 20% of the country, who dislikes Israel because it's capitalist and because it's Jewish. They hate religion, and it's other sort of sundry groups on the far right. You have people like my guest the other day, who have old-fashioned Jew hatred, but it's not the majority of Americans. I think the majority of Americans either couldn't care less about Jews or they generally have a positive feeling about Jews.
Well, I didn't say it was the majority of Americans,
Yeah.
but I do say that it would not surprise me if you're standing in line at a grocery store with 10 people and at least one of those people is an anti-Semite,
Right.
especially in certain areas of the country.
Right, which I don't really care as long as they don't mess with me. And, and look, I have my own biases. We all do. I think the answer to that, as I said in the beginning, is to make human contact and love. I mean, there's a great story of this rabbi in Omaha, Nebraska, who a reform rabbi who came to town. He was hired to be the rabbi of the synagogue, and this virulent anti-Semite was calling him all kinds of names on the phone, and really vulgar, nasty attacks of every kind. And he responded, rather than doing what we now do, which is call the authorities out and make it into a national incident. Instead, he spoke with him on the phone, and he got to know him, and he was tolerant of him. And after a period of time of him ranting and raving, eventually he calmed down and he got to know the rabbi. And the rabbi learned his story. He has a lot of personal problems, a lot of health problems, and ultimately he came over to join the rabbi for Shabbos dinner, and ultimately he became a Jew. Not that that's necessary, but the point I'm making here is right that the response to this kind of anti-Semitism, rather than weaponizing it on both sides and turning it into a police incident where you have investigations and you're going to destroy someone, which only fans more flames of that kind of anti-Semitism, you respond with facts, with kindness, with love. And if that doesn't work down the road and someone is threatening, yeah, you call the authorities. But that's a last resort. Unfortunately, that's become the first line now.
Oh, I don't know. I like that the rabbi's approach.
Yeah.
I think most rabbis, if you think about it, would take that approach. It's kind of what I was talking about earlier about the difference between religious worship in a synagogue versus a mosque. Both the Bible and the Quran talk about death to the infidel and stuff like that. I mean, the Bible is not without um, silent about murder or
Right.
getting even or what have you. I think religion is like that, at least written religion. Um, Human beings, though, have the capacity to treat people with kindness, to educate people, um, to talk about how dumb hatred is, especially blind hatred. Uh, whether you hate me because I'm a Democrat or I hate you because you're a Republican. Uh, there are people like that. I'm not one of them. I'm a First Amendment guy. So if you're a Republican and you're a Trumpy, God bless you. That's your right. That I disagree with you vehemently doesn't change the fact that I fully support 100% your right to be who you are and believe what you believe and advocate for your beliefs. So
Well, that's
what we need is a lot more love and tolerance than hate and intolerance, and that's
right, right. And
unfortunately
the
what
only
we're
thing
faced with today.
might put in here is that the Bible, what we call the Torah, it does call for the murder of certain people, but I think we ought to just be clear that they're not calling for the murder of anyone today. I mean, that was 6,000 years ago when the God of the Torah did call for the annihilation of certain people, the Amalek tribe,
Right.
and the children of Israel really didn't accomplish it. They didn't want to do it. They felt they were being commanded to do it. But those people don't exist today. No one is calling for anybody to.
You're making my point though.
Yeah,
My point is that this is not a religious thing. It's a people thing.
right,
People choose to behave like that. People choose to interpret certain sections of the Quran as meaning this or that. People chose, for lack of a better way to say it, as you point out, to interpret the Bible that way. I'm not
Right.
saying that either book advocates specifically for today's human being to behave like that. It's how they interpret it, and that's the problem.
No, I know it, and unfortunately, I do think that the Quran and the Hadith do have some language in there that do call for killing
No
people,
question. No
but
question.
yeah, and in Israel today, and as part of the morale to keep up morale in a war, they've referred to the enemy as Amalek. I would note that they're not calling for people to be killed on the Palestinian side. They're referring specifically to the combatants, people who are lobbing the missiles. And yeah, I mean, and they're Amalek not racially. They're Amalek because of their behavior. They're saying these, they would be like during World War II, the Nazis, it wasn't a call for the killing of Germans. It was specifically the regime that ran that country that was engaging in genocide, that they had to be stopped, and that may have included
Right.
having them executed. It's based more on behavior than it is on any kind of racial question.
Well, when we talk about Israel, um, it's very obvious to me that Israel, since 1936, has been an advocate for peace. There have been at least 5 different peace proposals, all of which have been rejected by so-called Palestine,
Right,
which doesn't exist, by the way,
right,
um, or let's call them the Palestinians,
right,
uh, rejected by the Palestinians and their Arab neighbors. So much so that 4 times they've invoked a declaration of war against Israel. Israel beats them and takes more land. That's essentially the history of modern Israel.
that's right.
The the Jewish people, on the other hand, have never declared war. At least Israel hasn't. They've never uh, declared, "Let's drive these Arabs into the sea and murder every Arab." Uh, they never advocated for anything other than peace. So my question is, do you protest Israel's right to defend itself from this most recent Holocaust because you're ignorant,
Hmm.
or because you're a Jew hater, or both? But it has to be.
Yeah,
It has to be that. It can't be anything else.
I
And I,
think
I
you're
would
racist.
submit to your listeners again, apolitically, I would submit that there's a Jew hatred out there that seems to make this, whether you want to call it left or right, I don't care. There's a
Right.
Jew hatred out there that suggests that killing, slaughtering 1,200 innocent people is not enough of a reason for Israel to respond. And Israel is the only country that they would ever say that about.
No,
When
look
Russia
at, I mean,
attacked
and
when
the
Russia
level
attacked
of,
Ukraine, did and Ukraine fought back? Did anybody criticize Ukraine for that?
right, no, you're right. It is the only country, and it's a level of slaughter that is so heinous and so evil that it does get to a question of what drives that kind of Jew hatred and that kind of anti-Semitism. And by the way, on Christmas Day in Nigeria, radical Islamic gangs slaughtered over 200 Christians in church. Nobody's talking about that. We don't hear the
No.
media mentioning that. Is it because they were black? Maybe. I don't know. It's because it didn't fit a narrative that's anti-Israel, perhaps. Mark, I want to ask you as a novelist, as an attorney, as someone who has some expertise, what do you think should happen? Not that either one of us have any say in this whatsoever, because we don't. But in your opinion, what should happen in the aftermath of the Gaza war once Israel goes through the very painful and difficult job of destroying the tunnels, destroying the Hamas infrastructure and stopping Hamas's control over Gaza. What should happen then to Gaza, do you think?
Well, the premise is that they successfully, in some reasonable amount of time, uh, end Hamas. And I question whether they have the ability to do that, given uh, at least a tendency toward um, what I'm going to call Jew hatred. If you look at the reactions country by country, it always seems to be moderation. Can't we all get along? Can't the Jews compromise, or Israel? Can't they do this in a more humane way? And I go back to my original statement. Hamas didn't, call a summit and say we're being oppressed. Let's go to a negotiating table and talk. They walked over the border and slaughtered 1,200 people.
Right.
So I don't think they have the high road to talk to anybody about Israel's behavior. Yet we
Certainly
have all
not.
these countries saying Israel should this and Israel should that, and it's very troubling to me. I would like somebody to tell me if this happened in America and some foreign country, Mexico or Canada, walked into uh, Detroit, because we're right on the border of Canada,
Hmm.
and murdered 1,200 people, what the reaction of Americans would be.
Well, right, of course. Every sovereign nation has a right to defend the lives and the property of its own people, and that's exactly what Israel's doing.
So what I
But
think,
my question is what happens in the aftermath? Because I think ultimately Israel, the Israeli people are united today, left, right, and center, regarding the necessity of destroying Hamas in Gaza. They can no longer tolerate an enemy on the border who is going to do these kind of atrocities. And every time there's a ceasefire, they just keep shooting the missiles. There's no, we see in Boston where I am, all these billboards on the highway. I don't know who's spending that kind of money. I mean, those things cost $10,000 a week, saying, ceasefire for Gaza, ceasefire, ceasefire. Well, fine. Everyone knows that if there's a ceasefire, the next day they're going to fire missiles. So
right?
it'll be over. So the question is, once Israel does the job they have to do, which is to destroy the missile launchers and destroy the threat and to neutralize Gaza, what happens to Gaza then? I mean, how should Gaza be governed in the aftermath of the eventual destruction of Hamas? And Hamas in Gaza will be destroyed. Israel's determined. The people of Israel have already gone too far in this. They're not going to tolerate a Hamas presence in Gaza. So, who then should run Gaza? What should Israel do with Gaza?
Well, again, what I started to say is I'm not sure there is a solution uh,
Right.
that way. And again, let's go back in history. Um,
Well, there has to be a
Syria, no, but I
solution
mean
because they're going
Syria.
to have to do something.
Well,
I mean,
hang on, though.
yeah.
Syria attacked Israel. Jordan attacked Israel. Egypt attacked Israel multiple times.
Sure.
I think what you're going to find is when Israel gets through with Hamas, and let's assume, to your premise, that they're successful. Don't you think someone else is going to rise up and create the same types of problems that are already?
Oh yeah, no,
I
it's
mean,
already on the northern border with Hezbollah, and Israel's going to have to deal with. That's an even more
and look what's
difficult.
happening in Yemen right now.
Right, but I think Israel has to deal with its borders, and the Hezbollah border is even more dangerous. I mean, I've been one of the news sites that I follow is the IDF itself, which posts on Twitter. It's a good page. Obviously, it presents the Israeli position, but they are showing that the northern border there in southern Lebanon, they have some of the best crack terrorist militias in the world. These are people, thousands of men who are trained and financed and armed
Right.
by Iran. And it's going to be a very, very tough job trying to take them out. And they're going to have to do it because they have thousands of who knows how many missiles aimed at Israel, and they're determined to conquer the Galilee. So, you're right. I mean, there's going to be, once they're done with Hamas, they're probably going to have to push into that region up to the Litani River. Israel evacuated that region. They betrayed their Christian allies under Ehud Barak in the late 1990s, which was a big mistake. And now they're going to have to go back in.
Well,
But putting that,
it's just so easy for other countries to tell Israel, um, ceasefire, self determination. I love words like that. Try living next to 7 neighbors who are trying to wipe you out and don't believe you have the right to exist. I was kind of buoyed by the negotiations with Saudi Arabia that ended
oh
when
yeah, I mean, look, there's also some great progress. Look at, I know you dislike Trump and all, but the Abraham Accords came about, I think, because of his approach, and his ambassador to Israel, Friedman, wrote a book about this, where he points out that after successive administrations, Democrat and Republican, had failed to make any headway. The reason Trump was able to do it is because he approached it as a businessman rather than as a sort of a geopolitical political figure, and they were able to do the unthinkable. I mean, cobble out historic peace agreements with Arabs and Muslim states and move an embassy to Jerusalem. But I want to, just because we're reaching the end of the segment, I mean, I would suggest that the two-state solution is dead. I don't think that it's been tried. Israel has experimented with it going all the way back to the Peel Treaty of 1936. And every time the Arab side has not been interested, they have not
Correct.
tolerated it, they've used it, they've invaded Israel. Now they say, oh, okay, well, we agree to go back to UN Resolution 181. Oh, wonderful. You know what that is? That's like a resolution which leaves Israel in control of the coast.
but
Of,
and they won't,
that's about,
and they won't keep their
and
word.
and even they won't do that. So the point I'm making here is that it's not going to work. It's going to be a civil war between these two people, and that Israel going forward, I think, has to annex those regions and offer Israeli citizenship to the Arabs. And part of that citizenship, and this was proposed on my program by David Rubin, he's a mayor of Shiloh on the West Bank, and that part of the citizenship, it's voluntary, that if an Arab wants citizenship, they have to undergo a 1 year training period where they learn about Israel, and then they have to sign a loyalty oath, just like someone applying for American citizenship signs a loyalty oath and pledges allegiance to the flag, and that loyalty oath is binding. And if they violate that oath, then they'll have to be gone.
It's
It's
funny.
that simple.
It's funny if you think about what you're saying. Um, where are the rest of the Arab countries when it comes to the Palestinians?
Oh,
Has
they don't
has
want them at all.
Has Jordan annexed the West Bank?
No,
Has
and they
Egypt
don't want
annexed
the
it?
Palestinians because the
Exactly,
Palestinians cause trouble for them. Jordan
exactly.
kicked
So
out the Palestinians in the 70s because they tried to overthrow King Hussein.
yes, they
Then they
did.
ended up going to Lebanon where they caused havoc. So, Egypt does. I mean, Egypt could very easily accept Palestinians in the Sinai, but they don't. They will not. And I guess that's a very thorny and complicated question. I'm not suggesting that Israel forcibly transfer people out. I don't think that that's the answer. I think there could be a voluntary exit. I think people could,
Maybe.
there are Jewish groups, and I don't think this is any secret, who have paid the money to Palestinians and help them resettle in places like Los Angeles and other countries. And I support that, but I don't really want to see a forcible ethnic cleansing, even though that's something that happens in the Arab world all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, just 2 months ago, the Artsakh region of Armenia was ethnically cleansed, and 200,000 Armenians, whose ancestry goes back to long before Islam
which has happened
in that
before, right?
region,
Right.
were basically exiled out of their own homeland, and they had to move to Armenia. So it's not something that's unique in the world. I mean,
No, it's not.
it's something that I think has to be a voluntary thing. But I do think that the future for Israel has to be for Israelis, and that includes Arab Israelis who may be a minority, but who have full rights. Anyway, Mark, we're kind of reaching toward the end here. So let my listeners and viewers know where they can get your excellent novels.
My novels are available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other online uh, booksellers. They're not available in bookstores, although I've found them here and there in my travels in a
Right.
bookstore. But mostly they're online
Okay.
bookseller products. Uh, the series is called the Zachary Blake Legal Thriller Series. I've written 9 novels about various topics, political and otherwise, in America. White supremacy, for instance, has been a frequent topic of my novels.
Great.
Uh, but again, the book, so that people understand the premise of the anti-Semite next door, is we tend to think of a neo-Nazi as this big bald guy with tattoos all over their body, who scream, you know,
Heil Hitler.
Jews will not replace us and stuff like that.
Right.
And what the book is trying to show people is that the modern anti-Semite might look like you and me, and
Good. And I think
uh,
that's true.
that's hence the title of the anti-Semite next door. Uh,
There we go.
if you can also go to my website, you see my name written there, markmbello.com. It can't be any easier than that. And
Okay.
there's links to the books there.
All right, Mark. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me. We should do it again sometime. We could get into some political issues. Maybe I could see that you have a
I don't.
lot of opinions.
Then we'll stop liking each other.
Well, that's we have to have a good and honest and sometimes ribald and vigorous debate. I used
Okay.
to have them all the time, by the way, with people on the left. They generally don't come on with me anymore. I did a series with Noam Chomsky
I
years
don't
ago
consider myself as being quote on
on
the
the left.
left.
Okay,
I just
moderate.
I I, I call them as I see them.
I get it. But anyways, I like a debate like that as long as you keep within certain confines. It's
I won't
important.
swear at you.
Well, this is the internet. You can swear if you want. But
Eh,
this is it's important that we have those discussions because otherwise everybody just starts talking to themselves and we end up siloed. And I've always that's why I had Kevin Barrett on the other day, who's a man of the right who's hates is a anti, as he calls himself, anti-Zionist, and we had a very tough conversation, but it's worthwhile. It's important, and I want to know what makes people tick. And I think my listeners are intelligent enough to make up their own minds. So, Mark, again, I want to thank you for joining me, and Godspeed. It was very interesting.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right, take care. All right, so that is Mark M. Bello. You can check out his books online. They're available at Amazon and at barnesandnoble.com. I've got Michael D. Shaw coming up shortly. Michael and I discuss issues of the day, usually on Thursdays at usually around 3 o'clock. In the meantime, I'm going to invite callers to call in. You can call in this program, and you can do that by actually picking up the phone and dialing 508 928 5255. That number again, 508 928 5255. If you want to send a chat, you can do that on the Rumble page. Rumble being kind of the mainstay of the show. And also TikTok. I am back on TikTok. I was kicked off TikTok about a year ago mainly because I was questioning the 2020 election. That's forbidden. Um, but it became to my attention recently that they've invited me back on, and here I am. I've got my 14,000 followers have been restored, and you're invited on TikTok to send in comments. To You could call in, you can text in, you can do your thing here at TikTok as we stream live. I can invite a guest. Let me do that right now. How do you do it? You can click on no invitation. Okay, I'm sending invitations. I've got 3 guest requests on TikTok. You're welcome to join the program, and you're welcome to comment as well. Again, the number, if you're listening live, is 508 928 5255. 50, yeah, there we go. Thank you. Trump 2024, indeed. If Trump is, I mean, I don't want to just say if he avoids the JFK solution, if you get my drift, and I want to be careful here because I don't want to get kicked off, then yes, I think it's his to win. And it'll be a glorious, glorious day if Donald J. Trump is elected. Hallelujah. I mean, well, I have to say, sometimes if I'm feeling a little low energy and I need a little pick me up, I do like to go to YouTube and watch the election coverage for the 2016 election and watch all the people. He can never win. Never. See this? Never. He'll and that kind of stuff. By the way, my new book, I'm going to hold it up. The Anti-Semitic Imagination, The Great Establishment Deception, thank you, is now available at Amazon and at Barnes and Noble. I frankly would prefer that people order it on Amazon because Amazon, with all of their faults, nevertheless, they did a great job of publishing both the ebook and the softcover. And I think that because it's pretty close to the publication, the book is still free as an ebook. So check it out. Why not grab an ebook? If it's not free, it's probably $1. So we're not talking about a lot. And then it's also available as a soft cover. And I have some pretty good interviews scheduled. I don't want to mention with whom because it's not confirmed yet. But it would be unwise of me to do that. But I've already gotten requests for review copies from some pretty good, solid radio hosts, newspapers, podcasters, and in fact, I note that if you happen to be a host of a program, whether it be a podcast or a radio program, and you'd like to interview me on the issue of my book, which deals with questions of Judaism and anti-Semitism and Israel, by all means, give me a call and we can maybe work something out where I'll have you on my program as well. In fact, Mark Bello, who's just on with me, he's going to be inviting me on his. So, that's something that I have here as a vehicle to promote the book. I don't have a budget to promote the book, so I use whatever means I have at my disposal, and my main vehicle, as such, is my own podcast and my own experience as a radio host and my contacts in the radio business. So, anyway, you're welcome to check out the book. $1 is too much for that garbage. Thank you, Macaulay. Entitled to your opinion. Of course, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't know what is in the book. How about you maybe take a look at a few pages and then make up an informed decision rather than simply throw it out? But hey, whatever. Um, anyway, this is going to be a very interesting year politically. This next Tuesday is the New Hampshire primary, which, of course, New Hampshire being the state next to my own beloved state of Massachusetts. And I have a tradition every 4 years of going to New Hampshire on the weekend before the primary just to check it out. I'm going this weekend. I'm going to spend time up there. And you just get to see the candidates, you get to hear the rumors, you get to meet the media, you get to see the hoopla. Um, I remember years ago when my daughter was very young, I brought her up with me and we met Barack Obama. So I remember, I go back. I mean, I remember when Bill Clinton was running for the first time and he was still not well known. I could tell that he was going to win by the fact that he had a lot of money and that he was slick and his office was fancy and he had very serious and dedicated paid employees and he knew what he was doing. I could tell that he was going places. And I remember I walked around with a Jerry Brown pin so that people would think I was supporting Jerry Brown, who I think I also met while I was there. And I remember walking into the Clinton office with the Jerry Brown pin, and they said to me, "So will you be supporting Bill Clinton after Jerry loses?" They were very confident. 25 states are now supporting Texas. Good, because Texas, by the way, has been making its own immigration laws going all the way back to the time when Texas was its own independent republic back in the 1840s. And that's never been challenged on the Supreme Court level. So Texas has its own unique way of being. It's almost has certain sovereign elements to it that no other state in this union has, partially out of the very tradition of it having been a completely sovereign and independent nation for a period of about 20 years, 1830s to 1840s. Um, and that as such, Texas, thank you very much, Lodge. Glad to be back. Glad to be on TikTok. TikTok has restored my station. And, we'll see how long that lasts. I'm just, in this day and age with censorship, you wonder what, you know, every time you step around a corner, you wonder if you're going to step in it. And unfortunately, we have to censor ourselves in this world. I mean, the two issues that I got in trouble with on TikTok and on YouTube, which has banned me, were my discussing the 2020 election, which I did incessantly, and which is forbidden by the establishment. You could talk about any other election, but not that one. And also my questioning the handling, actually in criticism of the Trump administration, of the COVID so-called pandemic. I don't want to say more than that. That's still a real hot potato. So I feel I don't know really what parameters I can travel on that one. I know that I got in trouble for interviewing Dr. Naomi Wolf, who heads up this group that is using Freedom of Information Act requests to get documents from Pfizer about their process of developing the so-called vaccine. I don't want to say more because TikTok will ban me. I'm not getting into it. So, we'll leave it at that. We need election integrity today. Thank you, Michael. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I wonder what's been done. Not much. I think there are some developments in Michigan with this True the Vote group that has uncovered major fraud and that's uncovered this organization that exists, I think, in about 20 states that's financed by that famous Hungarian billionaire. I'm not going to mention his name, among other leftists, that has engaged in, let's just say, practices, voter impropriety. I don't want to, I'm trying to craft this in a way that TikTok doesn't take me down. So understand that. I'm enjoying being back on TikTok, and I just, yeah, I mean, it's awful that we have to be like this, but that's where we are. Now, as far as voter integrity, I mean, during the midterms, there were some excellent organizations. Cleta Mitchell was one of the leaders of that, big Republican worker who who fielded teams of lawyers to respond to complaints of improprieties at the polling places, uh, people working the counting rooms so that when these millions of ballots came in by mail, there was some accountability over them and their authenticity. But even then, it didn't work in Arizona, did it? I mean, they just shut down the polling places. So, I mean, I'm not going to get into a comment about that. Other than that, I'll go that far. So much for freedom of speech, indeed. I mean, here I am. As they say in Yiddish, I'm sitting on Spielkas. I'm wondering, oh, when I when are they going to turn it off? You know, when are they? I mean, it's not a matter of being paranoid either, because it's happening and it has happened. Um, it's really more an issue of dealing with the realities that we're in. Either way, I am determined to launch this live stream again. And this has been my goal. This was what I was really moving very rapidly toward in 2018 before the censorship regime kicked in, where I was building significant following on YouTube and on TikTok and other platforms before everything got shut down. And my response to the censorship and the removal of my show from YouTube was to go to Rumble, which is now the main station for my show. And from Rumble, I'm now on a bunch of other live streams. Getter, Rockfin, I'm back on TikTok. My show streams live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter under my own name, Charles Moscowitz. And I think that all of this combined means that I now have a significant enough presence. And I'm doing it in the way that there's just a little here and a little there, as opposed to having all of my eggs in one basket. So that when they shut me down in one place, I can continue in another place. And I'm finding other live stream venues that I'm not a good technician, so I don't know how to set it up completely. But I know that I can eventually be live streaming on Telegram, on Odyssey, on Instagram. There's Alex Jones's station I might get on. There's Cozy. There's all these incredible live streams out there, and I just intend to gather them up as I move into this, and develop what I hope is an online community where we can all express ourselves through chats and through phone calls, and we can really have an experience together where we can really start to learn and delve into the issues of the day. Now, speaking of which, I do have, and maybe my show is one of the few that does this, but I do have, what do I have? I have a phone number you can call, 508 928 5255. That number again is 508 928 5255. You're welcome to call in. You're welcome to chat. You can do that on the Rumble station, and I will see that come up. Um, and you can certainly send me a note on TikTok as well. I'm also live streaming on Podomatic. And, as I say, my goal is to do this thing of mine, excuse me, and to do it live. So I'm heading up to New Hampshire over the weekend. I'm looking forward to um, getting around Manchester and Concord and just soaking up the energy of the primary. Biden is not running in the primary. His name isn't even on the ballot. He's not going to start until South Carolina. I'm sure there are strategic reasons for that. My understanding, according to Reuters and according to the mainstream media, is basically that they just consider New Hampshire to be too white, frankly, and they think they're going to get more support from minorities. Although I'm not so sure that's true, right? I mean, according to recent polls, President Trump is picking up amongst minorities, particularly black men. And I would note that President Trump and the MAGA movement, natural constituency for it is minorities, particularly working class minorities, who have always admired Donald Trump. He has always been a friend of minorities. He's a successful businessman who knows how to get things done. That's really what we need in this country. That's why his administration was as great as it was and as successful as it was. Not that I didn't have problems with certain aspects of it. Um, Democrats can vote for Haley. Yes, that is true, and it's disgusting. In New Hampshire, you have Democrats registering for one day as Republicans so they can vote for Haley, who is about as Democrat and as liberal as they come. And the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, apparently not only did he endorse Haley, not only is he using his political machine to skirt the law and get people to vote for Haley, but rumor has it, and again, it's rumor, that Haley has offered him the vice presidency if she wins. And they really are pretty confident, and it's scary. They will do whatever they have to do to stop Trump. And that can mean anything. These people are determined. There's the Gateway Pundit, which I urge people to read. Um, they had a story which involved an analysis of legislation being presented by Blumenthal, Denang Blumenthal, right? The lied about his military record. Richard Blumenthal, Denang Richard, that would basically transfer power. And this is assuming, and they're assuming that Trump could win away from the executive branch when it comes to calling out the National Guard in situations of insurrection. Now, what does that mean? What that means, according to the analysis of many people that I respect, including Steve Bannon. Hey, from Quincy. Hi, Mimi. I'm from Quincy. Um, what that means is that if Trump is elected and predictably the international left and their stooges launch violence on the street like they did last time through their thugs, their what Lenin called shock troops, namely Antifa and BLM, when they send them out to start burning black neighborhoods and looting black businesses and engaging in what the equivalent in Nazi Germany of the Kristallnacht, then they're going to goad Trump into responding by calling out the army, calling out the National Guard, without his knowing that Congress had passed a bill that prevented the president from doing that. That will be used as the pretext to impeach him immediately. Now, I don't think that Trump is going to fall for it. I don't think that it's necessary in a case where they do this for Trump to call out the National Guard. Um, I'll use the historic example of Warren G. Harding. He was president of the United States in the early 20s. He's gone down in history as a bad president, mainly because the left wing historians write the history books, but he actually was a good president. And he dealt with a national conspiracy by leftists to paralyze the entire economy through political strikes. They were planning on striking at all of the infrastructure, the railroads, the airports, businesses. They were coordinating a national strike, basically to bring the country to its knees, to do the powered, what we now call the plowed Piven method of overwhelming the country with this kind of strike. And Warren G. Harding was tipped to this in advance. And they expected him to call out the army, and which would have resulted in, I suppose, what could only be described as a coup d'etat. And they meant business. But he didn't take the bait. He didn't call out the National Guard. Instead, he had his agents from the federal government quietly, and he himself quietly, got in touch with the governors of the states and with the local sheriffs of the states and had the entire thing handled locally. And it worked. He was able to avert the strike, and he did it without getting the federal government involved. And thus he saved the country, like he could have done on January 6th. Yeah, which he didn't do, by the way. You know, January 6th, I mean, there's more evidence. If you look at the Gateway Pundit, they have a lot of it. That obviously it was a false flag. Who benefited from the disruption of the Electoral College Assembly? Now, I don't know how far I could go on this one without getting shut down. My echo chamber? I don't know. I mean, you're here, Andrew. You're not part of the echo chamber. I'm trying to expand outside the echo chamber so we can have a good, vigorous dialogue um, on all across lines. That's why, actually, the other day I had on Kevin Barrett, who's a viciously anti Zionist guy, and we debated, and I'm willing to do that. I'll debate you, Andrew, if you want to join me. Um, I'm not interested in just talking to people that agree with me. But getting back to January 6th, who benefited from that? Obviously, the people who are behind Biden benefited from it, not Trump. And this ridiculous, insane, demented conspiracy theory that Donald Trump tried to overthrow the government by sending the guy with the phony Viking hat and face paint into the US Capitol building, that this was, it's absurd. It's stupider and worse than the conspiracy theory they floated for 3 years, claiming that Vladimir Putin conspired with Trump or, quote, colluded with Trump to steal the 2016 election. Of course, I don't feel I'm perfectly comfortable talking about that. TikTok isn't going to shut me down for that one. In fact, they'll probably give me an award. While he was president, while who was president? Yes, Trump. I mean, basically called on January 6th. He asked the mayor of he went through the proper channels. He asked the mayor of Washington, D.C., Mario Bowser, to call out the National Guard. The Capitol was responsible for providing for security for the U.S. Capitol building. And the head of that department is the Speaker of the House, that being Nancy Pelosi, who didn't do diddly squat, and who had her daughter there filming a documentary on that day and capturing the whole thing in video footage. Um, and that basically all they had was bicycle racks guarding the Capitol. When in fact, inside the Capitol building, you had, the most important government officials. You had the Congress, you had the delegates, you had the vice president, you had, a very important event going on, and there was really very little security. But of course, that didn't stop members of the Capitol Police from firing live weaponry into the audience, into the crowd, and agitating a riot. Um, it's just a very sad thing, and but it obviously wasn't an attempt to overthrow the government. Mainly, what happened is that they stopped the assembly, and the assembly, because I followed the story carefully, and I was doing TikToks at the time and broadcasts, and I was warning people a week in advance to not get involved in a false flag operation. Everybody knew that Antifa would show up dressed in Trump gear and try to create trouble like they always did. I don't think anybody expected the Capitol Police to fire on people. I don't think people expected the FBI and other agencies to have people agitating in the crowd. They didn't expect somebody like a Ray Epps who would be there. We got to go into the Capitol. Who came up with that idea? But that's how it went down. And what happened is that it disrupted the assembly. The assembly was on schedule to conduct hearings for 7 states. The Constitution, Article 2, allows for the delegations to be contested in states if at least one congressman and one senator jointly signs a letter requesting hearings on that state. And if that is signed and handed to the president of the assembly, who happens to be the vice president of the United States, then the president of the assembly is then required to hold hearings and hear the evidence of impropriety in that state. I mean, the founding fathers put that into the Constitution because they expected there to be controversies in the states, as well there would be. When you have elections, there's always going to be people who try to steal elections, and they knew that. So you had scheduled hearings for 7 states. They included the usual states that we know about, the ones who kept counting after the election was over and there were obvious problems, those being Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. But there was also New Mexico, even though they had Biden won that state pretty convincingly. Nevertheless, there were people in that state, Republicans, who felt that there had been something wrong. Yes, Pence was a terrible sellout. There was something wrong going on, and so they requested a hearing. And the hearings were underway. The letters were presented. There was more than one. There was several congressmen who signed these letters. Several senators, including Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and several others, who had signed these letters. And the hearings were in the process of being heard. The states were being called in alphabetical order, which meant that Arizona was the first state scheduled for a hearing. I was watching it on television. Arizona began to present the evidence, and it was stunning. It was sensational. Um, what happened was that I had to be called away from the TV because I was doing some broadcasting, and I had a guest. I think I had Sheriff Arpaio on the line, And so I spent about 10 minutes with him. And then I went back to watch the hearings and I turned it on. And what did I see? I saw the guy with the shaman, the QAnon shaman, and uh, and other people storming the Capitol. And I knew when I saw that, like, holy crap, it's over. Sandy, you want to free Palestine? What I can tell you, Sandy, is that Palestine is free. It's called Israel. Palestine is the colonial name for Israel. Um, it was given to the region by the British in 1920. Before the British, it was just part of Syria, the Ottoman province of Syria. And to rename Israel Palestine would be like renaming Zimbabwe Rhodesia. Rhodesia was the colonial name for the country, and upon independence, the people of Rhodesia renamed their country Zimbabwe because it more reflected who they were. Well, the same thing is true of Israel. When Israel became independent in May of 1948, they declared their new name, and that new name was the State of Israel. And okay, what is it here? Semitism refers to various languages, not a people group. If not, where can you find a Semite? Um, I think that the term Semitism and anti Semitism goes back to the 19th century. This British, not British, German, I think he was German, Enlightenment figure named he must have been German, Wilhelm Marr, who coined the term Semitism and anti Semitism. And it was a racial thing, really. He was dividing the world into races. That was very popular in the late 19th century, very much a response to Darwin's theories of different races and the different levels of evolution. And it was he who referred to the Jews as Semites and the Arabs, by the way, as Semites, and anti Jewish sentiment as anti Semite or anti Semitism. The term eventually evolved to mean Jew hatred of all types. And that's where it is today. Free Israel. Thank you, Steve. Israel is free, thank God. And with all of the problems that they confront with the genocidal intentions of their enemies, Israel remains a free, vibrant, dynamic, organic society where a Jew can be a Jew in public and be free, where a non-Jew who's an Israeli citizen can be free, certainly a lot freer than any of the other countries. And I think that the Arab street should wake up to the success of Israel and start demanding the same system be put in place in their own countries if they want to express genuine Arab nationalism. Don't forget the Arab countries stretch all the way from the Gulf of Dakar, of the Gulf, the peninsula of Dakar, or I should say, I mean Morocco, all the way to the Tigris and the Euphrates. It's a vast and, in many cases, oil-rich empire of sovereign Arab states, but yet they're very oppressive. They should look to Israel. The Arab people should look to Israel and create nations that are similar to Israel, be inspired by Israel. Israel is an example of a sovereign nation that is not controlled by any outside forces. Israel is an example of a democratic society that has industry and culture and technology. I mean, King Faisal understood this when he signed the Faisal-Weizmann Accord in February of 1919, recognizing Palestine as Jewish. He did it because he was hoping that the Jews of Palestine, as sovereign people after the end of World War I, would form friendships and cooperation with the emerging Arab sovereign states, that together they would throw off this rotten internationalist establishment, and they would create dynamic sovereign states. Anyway, thank you. I just want to again reiterate, after all, I'm a new author here, my latest book, that I talk about this in my new book, The Anti Semitic Imagination, The Great Establishment Deception. Check it out. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Get it as an ebook or as a softcover. Um, I'm excited about this. I have interviews that are going to be coming up in the coming weeks. I'm not really free to mention where because they've not been confirmed yet, and it wouldn't be right of me to do that. But I'll keep you posted. I mean, I've got people who want to talk to me about this book, and it's moving. It's doing better than previous books. Hacky Zach, you embarrass me? Why should I embarrass you? I have no idea who you are. You're embarrassed? I mean, I don't want to even speculate as to why what you have to be embarrassed about, but whatever. Israel is not a democracy? Well, first of all, there was no such thing as a pure democracy. That was tried by the ancient Athenians and it did work well. And the United States is not a democracy, it's a republic with democratic principles, but it's a republic nevertheless, where you have representatives who represent their constituencies and then who debate and deliberate on legislation based on that representation. And ultimately, that legislation has to match a constitution. Now, Israel doesn't have a constitution, and that's a problem, but it's still based upon an implied constitution. And it still is based upon a parliamentarian system of government, which is, by the way, unique in the Middle East. So it's certainly a lot more democratic. I don't know what you mean. Autocracy? Is that a misspell? Whatever. Get back to me distance and let me know what you're talking about. Can I see the cover again? Sure. Thank you. The Anti-Semitic Imagination. The Great Establishment Deception. Available at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, both as an ebook and as a softcover. Let me show. I'm just showing my Rumble audience, and yeah, I'm proud of this one. Um, this one just kind of flew off the page. All right, what else do we have going on? Thank you for your insights. Thank you very much, dear Spirit. By the way, you can join the conversation. I've got Michael Shaw coming up in about 20 minutes. 508-928-5255. If you'd like to call in, you're welcome. 508-928-5255. As I am really launching the live stream and accepting calls. I'm looking forward to that. Um, we've got somebody wants to join. You're welcome to do that. I don't know if that'll work, but if you want to join on TikTok, you're welcome to do it. We were talking about the events that have been called by the media an insurrection. Obviously, it was not. What it did was it interrupted hearings that would have exposed, one way or the other, possible improprieties in those states. Because those hearings were canceled, once the Capitol Police let people into the Capitol building, there were no hearings. Instead, Congress adjourned, the Assembly adjourned, and it reconvened in the wee hours of the morning, like around midnight, with no media presence, no hearings, just a flat out vote.
Tired of lying.
In which case they gavelled in Biden. Matthew, hi.
Do you get tired of lying ever?
Excuse me?
Do you get tired of lying?
Well, I actually I'm obviously not tired, so I'm not lying. I mean, Are you
It's in your nature to lie. That's what you
what?
do.
How do I know you, Matthew? I mean, what are you
You
suggesting?
invited me.
And here you are. Can you give me some evidence of something I said that you would argue is a lie?
Basically, anything that comes out of a fake Jew's mouth is a lie.
I'm a real Jew, and I'm not lying.
Oh yeah, sure you are.
Why? Do you think I'm pretending to be a Jew?
Let's see his DNA.
I suppose I can
Let's
start
see
by
his
showing
DNA.
you my circumcision. No, I'm the real old-fashioned Jew.
Romans 2:29. If you're circumcised by the letter and not by the heart, you're not a real Jew.
No,
And then
you're
also,
talking about a Christian idea, which I respect.
Jesus called you the fake Jews. The
No,
Jews
no.
who call themselves Jews and are not are the synagogue of Satan, and you do lie. That's all you do.
Well, look,
And
you're
Israel is the synagogue of Satan, and all you Jews waiting on your Messiah so you can have your 2,800 goyim slaves. Like, you're an evil people, and Jesus
okay.
called you children of the devil.
I don't know.
Daughters of
I don't know
Well,
who Jesus was referring to, but
you know that's what you do.
was he referring to his own mother? I mean, Jesus was a Jew. I hate to break
Jesus
it to
was
you.
not a Jew. That's a Jewish lie.
So what was he
It's the
then?
honest Jew lie that Jesus was a Jew.
So then what
He
do you
was not a
say?
Jew.
So what was he if he wasn't a Jew?
He, he sure wasn't a fucking Jew. I tell you that much. And
Ah, man.
your whole Old Testament Torah Talmud is based on Babylonian Kabbalistic practices. Okay?
Matthew, do you consider yourself to be a Christian?
No.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't
Because
consider myself to be any
and the only
religion
reason I
because
mentioned that,
because
excuse me, look, let's have a
Jews have
conversation
infiltrated.
here.
The Jews have
Let, let,
infiltrated Christianity.
let's have a conversation here. The reason I bring that up is because Christianity has completely accepted the Torah and the Tanakh
I
as
know,
part of its book.
and that's why they're so fucked. Is because they have done that. That's why you got all these evangelical Zionists and these Christian Zionists. Y'all are just all a bunch of Abrahamic doomsday death cults, obsessed with prophecy, obsessed with Armageddon, obsessed with your Moshiachianity. That's all y'all do. And y'all
All
you're in
right,
a
look,
horrible
Matthew,
place.
I would argue that
You're in a horrible
we're
place.
obsessed with
But
belief
the
in God,
protocols,
something you
have
don't believe
read
in.
the protocols of the learned elders of Zion?
Yeah, you want to read my book, you'll find that I talk about them at length.
Everything y'all call anti-Semitic is actually the truth. What about all the Jewish sacrificing rituals that you've killed children all
Those are
throughout time?
just those
You've
are
gotten kicked out of
absolutely
109
ridiculous.
countries, and you blame
Yeah, looting
everybody.
operations.
Huh?
Looting operations completely.
No. You've gotten kicked out of
Yeah,
every
for
country.
looting operations. The Jews had all their property confiscated by
It was
dictators.
everybody else's fault. It's
Not
always
everyone's
everybody else's
fault. It's the same fault of the British who looted the Catholic
No,
Church.
y'all kept on killing children and drinking their
Oh,
blood
you know,
and using their
that's a
blood in
complete
your
lie.
little Hebrew rituals. Like y'all are such a disgusting people. Imagine a people so disgusting and so vile and so sneaky that you have to make laws making it illegal to hate you. You
What do you mean laws? I
orchestrated.
don't
Look,
know.
the Zionists orchestrated the Holocaust. They sold out the Jews
Of course,
in
look,
order to
Matthew,
orchestrate the Holocaust.
the
in
other
order to
day
make
the other day I had on a
anti-Semitic.
guest who said that the Jews are secretly behind all of the Islamic terrorism in the world too. You can blame the Jews for
They are.
everything.
They are.
Let me ask you,
Islam,
Matthew, do you
Islam
blame
is the broom of Israel.
sure. Do you blame the Jews for
I've
your
heard
own
rabbis say it.
do you
Don't
blame
sure me. Like, I've heard rabbis say
that
it.
the Jews are
And you
behind
know that
Islamic
Islam
terror?
was actually created by the Jesuits. And all of this, it goes back to how Jews have
Well, what do the
infiltrated
Jews have to
every
do with
single
it?
one of the
Well, first of all, the
Abrahamic religions.
Jesuit order wasn't created until after Martin Luther, so I don't see how they could have created
Well,
Islam.
yeah, okay, let's talk about Martin Luther for a second.
Sure.
He wrote a book called The Jews and Their Lies.
Where he called for the burning of synagogues. Matthew, let me ask you, do you personally blame the Jews for your own problems?
No, I blame the Jews for the problems that have happened right now. Okay, the Sacklers were Jewish, and they created the opiate epidemic.
Fine.
Also, you got the CEO.
What does their being Jewish have to do with it?
Who is a Jew?
I mean, we could talk about bad Jews and bad non-Jews.
Look at AIPAC.
Yeah, they represent Israel's interests.
Politicians.
Sure. I
I won't apologize for that.
They represent Israel's interest in the United States, just like,
How about
just like,
Epstein and Mossad? You know that
yeah,
Mossad,
no, I know that he was, yeah, look, the Mossad has done some unsavory things. Epstein,
Mossad also did 9/11.
Epstein, oh, that's bull crap.
No,
Epstein
it's
was,
not bullcrap.
Epstein
I have
was
facts on this.
also involved with the CIA and the
from 5 years
MI6.
earlier in 1995 that he even said that the towers, that there was going to be an attack on the towers. And then also you have a rabbi meeting a week earlier, and he talks about how the towers wouldn't be there anymore. It's all your Jewish
I have no
nonsense.
idea. I mean, if you want to show me evidence of that,
Y'all did it,
Matthew,
the dancing Israelis.
fine. You're welcome to show me evidence of it.
Mossad to film it.
Do you think that the 19 hijackers were Jews? I mean, what do you think? Who do you think?
They were Mossad, and all of that's made up. Do you think that?
Well, why? I guess that let's.
The airplane and was found?
Matthew, let me ask you this. Let's go with your hypothesis. For the sake of argument.
If you still think that it's the Saudis or
no, I think it was Al Qaeda.
Muslims that did that. You're an insane
well, then let me just let's
Jewish
talk about
lies.
insanity for a second. Let me go
You're
with your
spouting Jewish lies.
let me
That's
go
all
with
you
let
do.
me go with your
What
hypothesis.
about COVID? What
let
about the
me
people
let me
who
go.
were
Well, let's do
involved in
one thing at a
vaccines?
time, Matthew.
The
Let's do
CEO
one
of
thing.
Pfizer
Let's
is
do
a
one
Jew.
thing at a time here.
The CEO of Pfizer. No, it's not. It's always you.
Yeah.
And all roads lead back to Mossad and Jews causing all the problems. It's just like the Jews created usury. You're
Well,
the problem.
no,
okay.
we already have three things on the table now that I can respond to, and I'm not going to have a chance to respond to all of them. So we can do one at a time.
Practicing Talmud.
Okay. I mean, I didn't really have a chance to respond to them, so I'm going to. Okay, so I'm back here. I was losing control of the program because there was several things that caller Matthew brought up that I wasn't having a chance to respond to. And in order to have a conversation, I have to respond to each one of them instead of just having like a long litany of things that were brought in. All right, I'll wait a little bit here until people come back to TikTok. I'm sorry to have to have hung up on him. I don't know how to stop a caller, and I don't like to hang up on anyone. That's not my goal. I just, but he had already piled on 3 or 4 different things, and I wanted to respond to each one of them thoughtfully, but I couldn't do that because he just kept piling them on, so I had to let him go. He was making various charges against the Jewish people, and I wanted to respond to each one of them. The first was that the Mossad was behind the events of 9/11. Why would they do this? I mean, what did Israel gain from that? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And that the Al Qaeda are all. I mean, these are really very broad conspiracy theories, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but it has to be looked at with a somewhat of a dispassion. The second issue he brought up was that Islam was created by the Jesuits. First of all, the Jesuit order wasn't put in place until Martin Luther was in the Reformation, so that's not possible. There was just he was rapidly rambling off different charges, and I think that they have to be addressed one at a time. And so I didn't really have a chance to do that, so I had to let him go. Anyway, not because I'm not don't want to talk about his issues, I do, but there has to be a methodology of doing it. He obviously is obsessed with the Jews as being the problem behind all of the problems of the world, both in his own life and in politics. And I guess that's what I'm talking about in my book. I mean, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, which I think, and my premise, not to get into too many details on the book, is that there is a conspiracy, that it is satanic, but it's not Jewish. There are Jews who are part of it as such, not as Jews per se, but that the real conspirators, if you will, in every generation are much bigger than the Jews. I mean, it goes into a much broader and much wider group, and that Judaism as a religion and the Jewish people actually are the exact opposite of this world order conspiracy, and I do call it a conspiracy. Yes, I did. Conspirators. Um, that Judaism has been the counter to this conspiracy. It has stood up against the conspiracy because Judaism is a faith, and the Jewish people, whether they do so explicitly or otherwise, have embraced the idea of the individual under God, gaining sovereignty, a limited sovereignty on earth, due to the grace of the Creator who created man and women in his image imperfectly, and that we are to know God, we're not to control the world. That Jews, as such, who study the Torah, tend to be individuals. They tend to embrace moral and ethical values. They tend to admire education and success, both material and spiritual. And they tend to endorse and embrace ideas and institutions that lead to freedom. I think the reason Jews were expelled from European countries is because they threatened those oligarchies by their presence, by their faith. And they also, these oligarchs engaged in looting operations. They stole their property, right? I mean, it was kind of like stealing from the rich, like I think of Elizabeth Warren, the millionaires and the billionaires. Anyway, we'll have Michael D. Shaw with us shortly. And, if you're back, Matthew, you're welcome to debate me, but I do, as a bare minimum, expect a conversation, not this kind of diatribe where you're just venting your spleen. I mean, that's not, it makes you look ignorant, but putting that aside, we have to have a two-way conversation. If you just want to vent your spleen against the Jews, open up your own YouTube station and go have at it. I mean, I don't, not on my time. I mean, I'm trying to conduct a conversation that's a two-way dialogue here. Um, anyway, so I feel badly for having to shut that down. I didn't know how else to get rid of him. But I couldn't just let him pile one thing on after the other without my getting a chance to respond in a thoughtful way to each one of those charges. Not because I didn't want him to say them. He can say whatever he wants, including on my show. I mean, I have a wide level of tolerance for ideas that I don't agree with, and I certainly did not agree with just about everything he said. And I don't mind him airing them. However, I do expect to have a chance to respond. I mean, it's my show here. If he wants to, as I say, do his own thing, okay, encourage your viewers to share your live and invite more friends. How do I do that? Yeah, thank you. That's coming from myself here. It's a very interesting and compelling. Thank you. And again, I apologize for having to shut it down, but that's where we go. Michael Shaw should be with us shortly, and we shall continue from there. You're welcome to join the conversation if you're listening live, either through TikTok or through um, Rumble. And Rumble is really the flagship station since I was kicked off of YouTube. Let me just see what I've got going on Rumble. Yeah, we're live on Rumble. Yeah. You can text me on Rumble if you want. Let me just see if I can. Let me just see if I can lower the. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're live on Rumble. If you want to subscribe, you can. That would be great. Otherwise, I'm not trying to pitch anything. I don't have any sponsors. That's not what I'm doing at this point. The way I sponsor the program, frankly, is through my own books, which are available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble. My most recent book, I'll hold it up again, The Anti-Semitic Imagination. There we go. Is available now at Amazon and at Barnes and Noble. Anyways, what's happening? I mean, I hope that people come back. I apologize for having had to shut down that stream at TikTok, only because Matthew was just Riley, cranking up a lot of stuff that really required a reasonable response, and I didn't have a chance to do it, and I was willing to do it. So, anyway. So anyhow, as my late beloved grandmother used to say, you're welcome to join the program. We've been discussing a lot of issues. 508 928 5255 is the number. 508 928 5255. And what do we got going on here? My book, my book, my book. When you have a new book out, you want to kind of pound it a little bit. And so here we go. And we've discussed a lot of issues today. I had Mark Bello on earlier, the author of the Anti-Semite Next Door. Mark and I don't agree on a lot of things, but you can check that out and re-listen to that later. And then in the open line segment, we talked about the January 6th quote unquote insurrection and who was behind that, and what actually was an insurrection, which I would suggest was the enthronement of the present administration by questionable means. We talked about the great campaign of President Trump, something that looks promising on the face, but everyone is geared up and kind of cringing and waiting for some kind of a false flag to come down the pike. And because we all understand, I think, or generally, that the international establishment is not going to tolerate Trump in office. It could really set back their goals. In fact, it was said as much at the World Economic Forum when I think it was Harari, one of the kind of theoreticians of that forum, said that Trump could really put a damage on their international pretensions and their international agendas, and that even furthermore, there's now a story circulating on the Gateway Pundit where Klaus Schwab, you may eat the bugs, the head of the World Economic Forum, has said that elections themselves are outdated and that are quaint, he says, and will soon be a thing of the past. And by the way, that's something that I don't doubt. They view a lot of things as quaint. They view sovereignty as quaint. They view democratic principles as quaint. And we'll get into this in the coming days and weeks. But what I would suggest is that these people mean business. They're not effing around. This is very scary. And this should be concerning to everyone. The main premise of my book is that let's not get distracted by the shiny object of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, because that's not going to get to the real root problem of the corruption of our present international-oriented oligarchy. All that's going to do is distract from the real issues at hand, which is a set of beliefs and ideas that are embraced by people who maybe some of them might be well-meaning, but for the most part, we're talking about a very dark and satanic agenda, and something that I've been talking about for years. Let's see, do we have Mike is not here with us yet. He should be here shortly. Um, Michael D. Shaw shall be with us shortly, assumedly, unless there's some kind of a technical problem. Let me just see if he's trying to email me to see maybe he's having a little problem getting on. No, I don't see that. I think that let me just look at my sent box. Sometimes that's where these things show up. No, nope. I think he's going to be here shortly. Let's see. Nope, not here yet. Anyway, Michael, up there he is.
Yeah,
Mike, how are you?
just great. What about you?
I'm good. I'm just I've been live streaming a little bit today before you got here, and then I had a guest earlier. I'm kind of, I think at this point I have enough of a presence that I can do live streams and take calls. And I'm on TikTok, and I'm getting a lot of TikTok people responding to me, including somebody who went on an anti-Jewish diatribe, and which is fine. But the problem is that it became clear that he wasn't going to let me have a word in edgewise, and he kept piling on more and more conspiracy theories. The Jews are responsible for 9/11. The Jews invented Islam. The Jews invented terrorism. They invented usury, and he kept going on and on and on. And all of these things I could have responded to, but every time I tried to open my mouth and say something, he'd be running off to the next one. So I had to hang up on TikTok. It was the only way I could get back some control of the show. And I went back on immediately after. And what I would suggest to Matthew, the caller, is that he's welcome to come on and say anything he wants, as long as he lets me, the host, it's my show, have a chance to respond to it and to answer to it. Otherwise, he's just he should get his own TikTok and do his own thing.
Well,
So
most
yeah.
anti-Semites, as you know, are left-wing, and it's very characteristic of the left wing to engage in monologue and not dialogue. And
I know it's a style where they just and some of the stuff he was saying was pretty weird. And he was saying that the Jesuits were responsible for inventing Islam, and that the Jesuits assumedly were a Jewish conspiracy. Well, first of all, the Jesuit order was established after Martin Luther. That was like about 500 years after Islam.
yeah, but they could time travel.
Yeah, so I mean, let's take a look at the actual timeline there. But
Did he at least buy your book, though?
well, I mean, I don't know, but since you mentioned it, let me hold it up. The Anti-Semitic Imagination, The Great Establishment Deception. There it is. And
Well, I'd say that guy had a wonderful anti-Semitic imagination. If he could say that the Jesuits invented Islam, I've never heard that before.
no, I mean, well, the thing is, and the Jesuits are a Jewish conspiracy, I might add. And
That's right. Ignatius Loyola was a big Jew.
Oh yeah, I mean, everything everything goes to the Jews, and it's just that's what I mean by. I mean, that's not really my main contention in this book, but that's what he's into. And look, I'm willing to respond to it. I mean, I just had on Kevin Barrett, who's a very anti-Zionist. It's not anti-Semitic, and we had a very tough conversation. But I don't mind that. I'll engage that. I mean, and the book is doing good. The book is doing well.
Right.
I'm getting interview requests. I can't really mention on the air by whom because none of them have been confirmed yet, but people are asking for copies and they're reviewing it. And hey, it's
Is Michael
definitely
Jones going to review your book?
well. I really haven't reached out to him. I feel like I've done that, and
All right.
I don't know if I have anything new to say to him. Um, and I'm upset by his his podcast since the Hamas invasion of Israel. It's really beyond the pale, and I don't know if I have the stomach to talk to him.
Well, as I mentioned in previous broadcasts, the real problem with guys like that, whether it doesn't matter if the subject is anti-Semitism or just about anything, that if you think that you have a unified world theory of everything, and you try to, let's say, tie it into the Jews. So he looks around, and believe me, there's a lot of Jews that you don't like. So you can
I know. I
develop.
don't know. I don't know too many that I do like,
Yeah,
but that's
well,
beside the point.
yeah, okay. But what I'm saying is that if you uh, fixate on this idea that there's Jews behind it, um, to the exclusion of everything else, then you become a fanatic and a nut, and you
Yeah.
just go off the deep end. I mean, I've seen that happen to people in many fields. It's not just anti-Semitism.
No,
Seen it
you're
in
right. It's that people will latch on to a very specific and hidebound set of ideas, and they will conform everything to fit into those ideas.
yeah,
And it becomes like it's like a sieve. I mean, anything that agrees with that goes in, and if it doesn't agree with that, it's either ignored or it's distorted in such a way that they can fit it in. And it does eventually lead very good people. I mean, look at Dr. E. Michael Jones is a brilliant thinker. I mean,
yeah.
his books are extraordinary, but unfortunately, it's like painting a mustache on the Mona Lisa with him when you bring up Jews, in that everything suddenly goes through this prism where he completely his hair goes on fire and he loses any form of objectivity, including stating flat out lies about Jews and about Israel and about so and so is a Jew, this kind of stuff when they're not. Even if they were, it doesn't matter. But anything that fits into this argument, and in his case, it's an entirely religious argument. He takes what he views as an Orthodox Catholic position. I don't know if it really is, that the Jews are responsible for killing God, in that they were responsible for killing Jesus, and thus they're cursed. Um, and I get into that. I do a chapter on that actually in my book. I don't know if I want to get into it right now, but there it is. It's an issue, and I don't think that that necessarily means that conventional Catholicism has always embraced that in the way that he does.
No, I think that there are people that go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
Michael Hoffman is another one, and go to it to the extreme that they abandon the Catholic Church for not being tough enough on the Jews. So it's too bad. And I suspect that something happened early in his life that set him on this course. He's probably never going to admit what it was.
Yeah,
But
and it's actually I feel sad about it because when I first heard of him back when I was doing the program at the American Freedom Network, he didn't talk about the Jews at all. I mean, he had some amazing books out, one of which was called Degenerate Moderns, and he was doing cultural analysis, and a book that I really thought was incredible. I read it very carefully, and I had him on, and he was great, and it was a reasonable program, and he had some very, very interesting insights. And then I kind of got out of doing talk radio for a number of years. I was busy as a father. I was busy with business. I was busy with doing a lot of other things. And so I was sort of out of the business for many years. And then when I started getting back into it, I thought, hey, I remembered him and I looked him up to see, hey, he might be a good guest. And I was horrified to see all this anti-Jewish crap.
yeah,
and something had happened. I mean, I don't know what it was, but he's obsessed with it now. It's pretty much all he does.
Well, the other guy who's like that, who's a convert, is this brother Nathaniel character.
Oh yeah, he's look, I mean, I probably will have him on. I heard that he was on recently with Alex Jones,
Yeah.
and I probably should watch that. He was kicked off of YouTube, but his attitude is so vulgar and so nasty, and he uses words like kike and just so. And he's a former Jew. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened in his case was he hated his own background, and fine, he converts, and that's great. But then he had to start looking at negativity. And again, there is negativity out there. If you want to make a laundry list of all the bad Jews, you can make a list.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I don't think that proves anything, but he got hung up on this. You're right. He did get kicked off YouTube for quote hate speech, although it's not really consistent how they use that. But he's anti-Semitic. There's no doubt.
Oh, for sure.
And
unfortunately, you have these people who are former Jews who look back with hate and anger, and there's a history of that. I mean, Nicholas Donin was a former Jew who he became Catholic, but he also went to the Pope and he tried to say the Talmud has all this nasty stuff in it about Jesus, which is questionable. It may have. Either way, the Pope at the time ordered the Jewish rabbis to get rid of it, and they did, because the rabbis in Europe looked to the Pope as the highest religious authority. Plus, the Pope meant business. But the result was that the Pope sent Nicholas Donin to King Louis IX of France to destroy the Talmuds, and Louis IX of France did so. He burned something like 13 crates of Talmuds that he gathered from all over Europe on the lawn of the Chateau de Ville along the Seine. So the other former Jew that, of course, became notoriously anti-Semitic is Torquemada, who was one of the leaders of the Spanish Inquisition and who actually pushed Ferdinand and Isabella in the direction of engaging in that. They weren't really interested in it, but he was like, oh no, you have to do this. I can tell you how evil the Jews are because I used to be a Jew. And he came up with all this stuff. So, that's the school that Brother Nathaniel's in.
So I don't know if he's ever been compared to Tomas de Torquemada, but that would be a good topic too.
Yes. Speaking of which, I'm getting an anti-Semitic note here on TikTok. Somebody's saying to me, so how many kids does Israel need to kill before we tell them to relax? Well, first of all, what does he think? Israel is trying to find kids so that they can kill them? They're sending in their soldiers. Let's see, where are the kids? Let's go for the kids. We're not trying to get out missile launchers. We're not trying to stop enemy combatants. No, we're going in there to find kids. I mean, talk about the idiocy. I mean, this would be like, Eisenhower on D-Day and, planning the invasion of Nazi Germany. Oh, we're going to bomb children, Now, I'm sure children did die in that, but it wasn't like they're sitting in the Situation Room and saying, gee, there's more children over here than over here. We'll hit that spot. Then we could get the children. I mean, this kind of atrocity propaganda, not only is it a lie, but it's not rational.
The irrational aspect of it is the important thing, that people have, in many cases, lost their capacity for rational thought. I mean, if you think about that for one moment, how is it a military advantage to go around and kill kids? I mean, obviously,
it's absurd. I'm getting another one here. This is, he says, this is from Alex Halen. There's literally videos of IDF soldiers saying they're trying to find kids to kill. I'd like to see those. Let's see the evidence of that. That's ridiculous. This is flat out untrue.
Well,
And I
if you're
doubt
going to
if
make a
this.
statement like that, if you're going to make a statement like that, at least link the video.
Yeah, let's see the video. Reminds me of people who have tried to come on my show over the years, insisting that there's space aliens raping women, right? I want to see evidence before I sign on to anything like that.
Well, I mean, one form of evidence might be Hillary Clinton.
Okay, well, there we go. So maybe they can make an argument. Anyway, but to get back to the subject at hand, my book is available at Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. It's available now. I think that as it's both an ebook and a soft cover, and I believe that for the first week, Amazon makes the ebook free. So go on and get it. Maybe they might charge $1. I don't know, but check it out. It's available. So we have the New Hampshire primary.
Oh, yes.
Coming up on Tuesday, and every 4 years I make it a ritual to go up there and see what's going on. And this year is no different. I'm planning on going probably on Sunday, and it's interesting. It's you not only get to see the candidates, and you get to see all the media figures, but you hear all the rumors, and you go around to the different offices. I don't think much is going to be going on this year because, first of all, Biden is not even on the ballot in New Hampshire. He's waiting for South Carolina. The official word is that New Hampshire is too white, that he thinks that it doesn't represent the country.
Okay, stop for a second.
Yeah.
How is that even possible? The country is mostly white. So what does that statement even mean?
Who knows what the real reason is, but they're not up there. And there's this minor candidate, Dean Phillips. He's a congressman from Minnesota who is on the ballot, and he's up there. And then, of course, on the Republican side, you've got Nikki getting support from the governor, the Rhino governor, Chris Sununu.
Oh, he's terrible. He is another example of how the second generation is worse than the first. The original,
right. and the first was no great shakes either.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And you have George Romney and Mitt Romney.
Oh my God, Mitt Romney! I don't know what the hell is the matter with him. I admired him as governor of Massachusetts. I met him a few times. He was supportive. I don't know. I think that he's become so bitter by having blown that election against Obama.
Yeah.
That he just is obsessed with Trump to the point where now he's just way off the deep end. But Chris Sununu is not only endorsing Nikki, but he's apparently engaging in various legally questionable activities to help Nikki, like getting certain ballots submitted, getting certain people involved in politicking who really aren't legally supposed to, like state employees. And that rumor has it that Nikki has offered him the vice presidential slot if she wins. And, it's going to be, New Hampshire apparently has a law which allows people to change their registration on the day of the election. So they're basically openly calling for Democrats and independents to come in and vote for Nikki as a way to stop Trump. And I think that I don't think they're going to pull it off.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to get a lot of those kinds of votes, and they're going to try to pull it off. And it could end up.
You've been there your whole life, okay?
Right.
You probably, even when you were up for the primary, you may have even interviewed William Loeb.
Oh yeah, sure. There's nobody like that now. I mean, now the Manchester Union leader is. Yeah, I mean that's gone to the dark side.
Well, how did that happen? I mean, can we take a minute and you can explain to me how Live Free or Die, the license plate is now changed to Trans Welcome?
I'll tell you how it happened. That's easy. Massachusetts people moved there. That's how it happened. mainly because they wanted to stop paying taxes in Massachusetts, and they can drive to Boston in about a 1 hour drive. That's why it happened. And they brought their liberal politics with them, even though they're now enjoying the conservative government in New Hampshire, which doesn't have a state income tax and which is pretty conservative.
It
So
doesn't have
they're
sales.
enjoying what?
No, it doesn't have sales tax either.
But, well, that's right. That's why you have these gigantic malls on the border.
Yeah.
People go in. There's one mall. It's actually pretty funny in Nashua, New Hampshire. The parking lots in Massachusetts, the mall stores are on the New Hampshire side of the border. So you could go to like a big box store and buy a flat screen TV at no tax, and then walk it out to your car in Massachusetts. Yeah, I mean, this is what's happened to New Hampshire.
Okay, but what is the mentality? I mean, explain this to me because that's where you're from. All right. I'm leaving horrible Massachusetts with all the taxes and all the BS, and I'm going to go to live free or die New Hampshire, and I'm going to recreate Massachusetts there. What?
It's bizarre. Look, you've got a lot of people in this state, elderly people, and in New York State too. They basically spend the winter in Florida where they don't pay state taxes, and they'll stay down there for like 1 or 2 days longer, so they can technically claim Florida residence when then they come back to Massachusetts for the summer. And
Right.
they've basically avoided paying taxes in a state where they have supported high taxes.
Yeah.
For everyone else, for the rest of us poor schleps who have to like shell out all this money to live here and support the state. I don't know. It's a very strange thing, but New Hampshire definitely has taken on a lot of people from south of their border.
Yeah.
and
Oh,
by
same
that I
thing
mean Massachusetts.
happened, in fact, quicker, I think, in Vermont, when the New Yorkers came up, the Ben and Jerry phenomenon.
Yeah, and they took over the state. That's why they got Bernie Sanders. He's a New Yorker.
Yeah.
Howard Dean was a New Yorker. Remember him?
Right.
Yahoo!
Yeah.
Right. He's all these New Yorkers basically. Yeah, I mean they took over the state, and the regular poor Vermonter has lost. They're no longer ruling the roost there. I mean it's.
Well, the other place that this is happening, by the way, is Arizona.
Yes.
Used to be a rock hard conservative place.
And Texas, I think,
Yeah.
is also having this. You get all these Californians, they're moving to
Exactly.
Idaho, and yet they take their politics with them. I mean, I don't know if that's entirely true, but they seem to. And yet, I don't. What do they want to do? They want to turn Idaho into California? Didn't they leave California?
I think the mentality is that if you were to ask them, do you want to turn, I mean, the classic example was the Ben and Jerry effect.
Right.
If you would go to some New Yorker who moved there, and you would ask him, do you want Vermont to become like New York? And they're going to say no. But the problem is that for these liberals, left-wing politics, Sanders is a great example, is a religion. I mean, he's nominally Jewish. He's pro-Hamas. So
Yeah.
the
And
politics.
he's also the other aspect is he's a complete phony. He's an establishment figure that he didn't take on Hillary Clinton. He owns a summer house and I think on Cape Cod. He's wealthy. His wife apparently is on a board of directors where she's pulling in a lot of millions of dollars. I mean, the complete fraud.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, this is so typical. Peter Schweitzer, the reporter, did a great book on this called Do As I Say, Not As I Do, where he looks into the background of people like Nancy Pelosi and other people, very wealthy people who have basically scammed the system all their life. And yet they're pushing high taxes and anti-business and, they're screwing everyone else.
Well, because the best part of it is you have yours and now no one else can get theirs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what. Yeah, I mean, it's like I guess that sometimes you get these people who reach a level of success where they're rich. I mean, the Pritzker family is a good example in Illinois, where they're super rich, they're worth billions, and so they got nothing better to do than to start poking their nose into everyone else's business. They start to think that they have some kind of a, I don't know, that anti-Semite who was on with me through TikTok talked about Jews being obsessed with messianic concepts, which we're not, but they have a messianic complex, and they're not. If they are Jewish, and a lot of them are, most of them aren't. It's nothing to do with their religion. It has to do with
Right.
their wealth and their this sense of entitlement. They suddenly believe that there's something ordained about their wealth, that somehow they're better than everyone else, and that therefore they have to not share a cent of the money, but use their power and their influence to control the rest of us. And I mean, I don't know if these people mean well or not. I don't really care.
No, I
All I
don't
know is
think
that it's very
I,
destructive.
I don't know if that even applies anymore. I mean, it would be nice, I suppose, to think that they're misguided and so on, but no, they're not. It's about power. They're basically evil. I mean, at least a guy like Joe Kennedy was more upfront about it. Hey, you know what? I made all my money with bootlegging, and now let's make that illegal.
That's right. Now he's going to go after the mob.
Right.
So yeah.
Uh, so uh, it's just too bad. It's a bad phenomenon, and
Mm.
people should recognize what's out there. Um,
So anyhow, I'm going to New Hampshire this weekend to see the primary, to walk around, to talk to different people in their offices. Um, I don't think that there's going to be much going on. I mean, I hope that Donald Trump comes. I mean, when I was up there in 2016, I did get to see Trump
no,
do a. He was at there's this one hotel in downtown Manchester. I think it used to be the Holiday Inn. I don't know what it is now. I think it's the Radisson, which they all go to. All the media sets up there, and there's a restaurant in the center of it, and they have like a stage, and that's where I saw Trump being interviewed by Chris Matthews,
hmm.
and his son was there, kind of ushering people in and out, and there was like a buzz about him. You could just tell he was going places. This is before, we all knew who he was. I mean, it was just at the very beginning. And I also saw Obama up there. I was up there with my daughter, and we got to meet Obama briefly, and I could tell he was going somewhere. He
Yeah.
had a buzz. I mean, it was like electric. There's something about it. So it's interesting to see, get a firsthand, up close look.
Are you going to do any
And
interviews of like
I
Nikki
might. I
Haley?
mean, else, I'm certainly ready to. We'll see. I mean, on the other hand, you see, I mean, it's pathetic. I remember seeing Deval Patrick, former governor of
Oh yeah,
Massachusetts, running for president in, I think it was 2016. He couldn't fill there's a small bookstore on Main Street, just a couple of old blue-haired ladies sitting there, and he's delivering a speech. It was awful. It was pathetic. It was sad. So you see that too. You see candidates that are really not making it. But I don't know I don't think this year is going to be that interesting because the only interesting race is going to be Trump versus Nikki or
what do you think is going to
Moscowitz.
happen with DeSantis? Is he going to quit after New Hampshire?
I think so, and I think that the media it's such a complete falsehood. Did you know that Trump only got half of the Republican votes? Really? So then you think that the DeSantis followers are going to follow Biden? I don't think so. Maybe Nikki, fine, but I mean, she's got Democrat. She's basically a Democrat, and she's being financed by these fat cats. The guy who runs apparently LinkedIn is a big liberal Democrat donor, and they're all financing her. Everyone has money on her. The huge quantities of money pouring in. She's spending a ton of money on ads here in Boston. They always buy a lot of ads in Boston in the weeks leading up to the primary, so I get to see that. Trump is
What is
spending
the
money
deal
too.
with her? Okay, if you're going to try to install somebody, why pick someone with zero charisma? I mean, who figured that she was going to be the it girl?
I mean, I don't know. She's driven to do it. She's like, it's like Obama. They discovered he came out of nowhere. He was fixing parking tickets one minute, and the next minute he's catapulted into the White House. It's kind of like, this kind of like false image that they're hoping to craft. Maybe Ramaswamy was one of those types. I don't know. I liked him, but who knows? We don't know anything about him. He
Well,
only said a few things that were good.
it'd probably be fun for you to just sort of hang out and pigeonhole people and get your phone out and start recording everything. And
Mm.
uh,
I have a note here from TikTok. Someone's reminding me, Obama was a senator in Illinois. Yeah, he was a senator for about 5 minutes. He ran for the Senate in a special election after the sitting senator had to step down from corruption. I think he went to jail, and he beat Alan Keyes, who, by the way, happened to be black. And if he
right.
had won, he would have been hugely supported by conservatives. He announced his candidacy in the parlor of Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers, former weatherman who had apparently authorized a bomb be placed in the Pentagon. Talk about insurrections. And the day after he won, he started his campaign for the presidency, right? He was in the U.S. Senate, I think, for 2 years before he was
I don't think it
inaugurated
was.
into. Probably not. He was inaugurated pretty quickly. I mean, he was basically had huge support and backing financially, and they put him up as the keynote speaker at the Democratic convention that year, where he was introduced. And he just was the kind of guy that they wanted, somebody who was a blank slate that liberals, conservatives could even identify with, and did. He had a
Well,
clean image.
the appeal there was that he was this non-threatening, somewhat effeminate black guy who
Yeah.
was. I didn't. They kept saying he was a good speaker. I didn't think he was a good speaker. He had a good voice. He had
He
a
did,
radio.
and he had a nice smile, and he had a nice kind of family story. We don't know the whole truth there, but the point is, he was packaged like you'd package a can of peas,
Right.
right? It was an ad campaign, huge backing. I mean, if it wasn't for all of that, I mean, Obama would be flipping burgers at Wendy's today if he wasn't groomed to take that position.
Well, again, you come up with this concept of who installed him, because if you look at his background, he was the only person in the history of the Harvard Law Review that never wrote an article. How did some guy who was at best an average student in Hawaii suddenly get catapulted into Harvard Law School?
Right.
It
Well, he was groomed from day one. I mean, they say that he was groomed by this guy, this communist guy in Hawaii. I don't remember his name, Davis, I think. Early on, they saw his potential, and he kind of conditioned him and educated him in a way that he could present himself as something other than who he was.
Right.
And you have that in the background of a lot of people. I mean, I'll give another example, and I don't remember the names, but Eleanor Roosevelt, right?
Oh,
She was basically a conservative until this guy, what was his name? He was like a leftist political activist. He got a hold of her in the White House, and she would go to sessions with him, and he basically developed her as a leftist. And her son, the son-in-law, who wrote the book My Exploited Father-in-Law, a doll, wrote about this in his book, how she was basically conditioned and groomed She really was not anybody who was particularly political before that. I think that describes Obama. I think in Obama's case, it was done at a much earlier age.
You
But
you
these
make
people are groomed for these jobs.
you make a very good point because she was in the 50s and early 60s doing the rounds of TV and whatnot, and she just was saying all the right words, but it just didn't seem sincere. And it was the same kind of
Yeah.
thing with Obama, that this is what you're supposed to say. Uh, I don't think either of those two really believed in anything.
No, they were empty suits. They
Yeah.
were there to serve someone other than themselves. I mean, they didn't have any particular convictions. Neither of them was particularly bright or intellectual. They were just images. Obama had an image, and it
Yeah.
was carefully crafted. You mentioned that he was a mediocre student. He had I mean, Hillary Clinton did this too, but everything about him was put under lock and key. You can't see his transcripts from any of his colleges. We couldn't even see his birth certificate. I mean, let's not go into that. But the point is that everything about him was manufactured. He was like a complete hologram. And I mean, Hillary Clinton also. I mean, you cannot see her valedictorian speech at Wellesley. It's not public. You can't get it. It's all like everything has been carefully battened down. I mean, we don't have any idea who these people are. I mean, that's the thing I've always disliked about Obama. We don't know much about him. He's
No.
an image, and I think that's what they're trying to do with Nikki. She's who knows the truth. I mean, and that's why she's not debating DeSantis, because he is starting to blow the whistle on her, but it's too late.
Well, you make a very good point. He got terrible advice
Yeah.
because she had a lot of baggage that he could have gone after.
Oh, by the way,
And
we got somebody's telling me he's extremely intellectual. Have I read any of his books? Really? You think that Obama wrote a word of those books? Give me a break. I think Bill Ayers, they say, wrote the first one. I mean, those are,
no, they were all ghostwritten. I think most people know that.
and in fact, the most recent biography of Obama, I mean, probably he's probably had about half a dozen by now. He kind of, sort of spills the beans a little bit on that, and about certain things about Obama that have been fabricated. And one of them is the dubious question of his authorship of anything. Anyway. So
Well,
getting back.
you could tell, for heaven's sake, anytime he was in a situation
Yeah.
where he had to speak contemporaneously, he came across extremely poorly. So,
Oh, I know. He would start stuttering and he would start humphering, and you're right. I mean, once he was off script, he didn't do well. I mean, everything was. They even said that he read off a teleprompter when he addressed an elementary school class.
yes.
I mean, everything was scripted. And hey, look I don't blame him. Somebody knocked on his door and said, "Hey, we're going to make you president. You're going to have all this glory. We're going to give you Nobel Prizes. You're going to travel the world. You're going to be, rich." He got a $10 million advance on one of his books. Sure, he took it. I mean, it may
Well, let
be
me ask
sold
you,
out whatever he believed in.
okay, if someone made you that offer 20, 30 years ago, and you knew what the strings attached were, that they own you,
Yeah.
I mean, is that the kind of deal that you would make?
No.
I don't think so.
No, and even Obama early in the campaign, apparently he made a couple of comments about his fellow black citizens. That hey, they have to get in the job market, and Jesse Jackson responded by saying that they were going to cut his balls off, and that immediately Obama backed away, went back into the cage. So I mean, he knew who was boss. He was just a mandarin of this rotten establishment. this internationalist-oriented, amoral, illuminated establishment that he served as so dutifully. And that's why they hate Trump. Look, I mean, the people, the Harari over at the World Economic Forum has said in one of their public talks, and they're having the forum now, that if Trump's elected, they could end up having major problems in their internationalist agenda. And that's the
Oh
truth.
no.
And then you had the next day you had Klaus Schwab, right? You will eat the bugs. The head of the whole thing refer to elections as something that will one day be viewed as quaint history. He said it openly. They're not making any secret about it. You know, they've been,
They're certainly not. They have a Grey Z movie villain with a German accent that I'm sure he puts on more than he actually has to come across as this evil world dictator. I mean, you can hardly watch that guy with a straight face. It's such a cliche.
Yeah, I have somebody saying I'm tearing Obama down because of his race. What I would say to that is that Obama ran in that special election in Illinois against a man by the name of Alan Keyes. He had been ambassador to the UN under George H.W. Bush. He was a flaming conservative. I met him once at
Highly
some
intellectual,
convention.
by the way.
What?
He was highly intellectual.
Oh, yeah,
Alan.
very intellectual, very bright man. And if he had won that special election and if he had gone on to be president, I can assure you conservatives would have been completely rallying around him. And by the way, he was black. So, this is ridiculous to say that. And his family was American, I'd point out. So
I think we're tearing down Obama because he's a phony.
Of course. I don't give a damn about his race.
And if he were white, we'd tear him down also.
That's right. And by the way, his race was one of the things that was an appealing about him.
And he was only half black, by the way.
Yeah, but putting that aside, I think it was interesting to elect a black man as president of the United States. I supported that for that. That was the one redeeming quality. If anything, we expected Obama to be black in office, which was, in a way, maybe I'm expressing, I don't know, I wouldn't say a racist view here, but a stereotypical view of a black man. Super strong, super patriotic, super street smart, someone that doesn't mess around, someone who's virility. We wanted that from Obama, right?
And we didn't get
it. No. So, it's really not an issue of that. And then, of course, you have Kamala Harris, who grew up as white and who didn't suddenly discover her blackness until she got into political office. But putting that aside, I should give out the number if anybody would like to call in this segment. 508 928 5255. 508 928 5255. And again, I'll get in another shameless plug for my new book. What the heck, right? The Anti-Semitic Imagination. Check it out. It's available at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Doing pretty well.
what I have to ask you, what is that on the cover? Because you held it up so quickly. The cover picture. Okay.
That is a very famous image that was taken off of the Ark of Titus in Rome. That Titus destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. He was the general. His father was Emperor Vespasian. And after he destroyed the temple, he brought back a lot of the booty and a lot of the best men out of Judea to parade them down the streets of Rome, because that's what the Romans did, when they conquered a province.
Right.
And there would be like a ceremony, and that they'd be paraded, and then they'd be enslaved. And that image is of that parade, and it shows the Jews holding up the candelabra and and being paraded down the streets of Rome. So that's in Rome. I've seen it. It's amazing. There is an ancient Jewish tradition that no Jew is allowed to go under that ark. It's still there. It's in the It's in the Roman Forum. I've seen it, and it's amazing. I didn't go under it, by the way, but I looked under it, and it's pretty impressive. So I use that image to illustrate the book because it's a great image of continuity for Judaism, and it shows that it's not like we were born yesterday. I mean, we've been around.
Well, that's right.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
I was going to say that the recent Hanukkah back in December, of course, celebrates, among other things, the story of the Maccabees, who threw in with the Romans. And, I mean, to be fair about it, there were, 150 or so years of decent relations before things went to hell. But
Right.
was that in retrospect a good decision?
No. Well, what happened is that the Maccabees kicked out the Syrian Greeks.
Yeah.
And the Syrian Greeks and there was somewhat of a civil war between the Maccabees, or the Hasmoneans, who were religious Jews, and the more secularized Jews led by Jason, who was a Greek Hellenized Jew. And the Maccabees prevailed, and they drove out the Greeks, and they created a sovereign state, the Second Commonwealth, which was pretty successful for about 150 years, until eventually the Romans came in, and they took advantage of a civil war between the two sons, and they sided with one of the sons, and they basically installed him, and in the process, Jewish sovereignty ended. But one of the first things that Judah Maccabee did after liberating Jerusalem was he sent a major gift to the Romans. And it's, of course, controversial. Politically, look, Rome at that time was the most powerful nation in the world. It would be like Israel today sending a gift to the United States. You want to have a friend in the world like that.
Yeah.
So I get it from a geopolitical standpoint, but spiritually, not so great. Anyway, it says, who knocked on Trump's door? I don't know what she's talking about. Bringing things back to the New Hampshire primary. Look, I do think that this is Trump's election to win. I just hope he doesn't screw it up. Trump has a propensity. I mean, there's a part of him that I think is a little bit self-destructive. It's just my analysis. And I worry that he's going to say something or do something that is so stupid that it's going to be used by his enemies.
Well, let me take away the pain here. I believe, and you may disagree, you probably do disagree,
Yeah.
that essentially every bad decision that Trump ever made was following the advice of his daughter and son-in-law.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I think he, unfortunately, when it came to the so-called pandemic, he listened to Fauci and Birx. That was stupid. And he's had some bad people around him.
Right. But who told him to listen to Fauci and Birx, who were completely incompetent? I mean, he's not stupid. It was so uncharacteristic of him to listen to people like that. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who are doctors.
He got sucked in by them.
You may have no idea how doctors that actually practice real medicine with real patients despise people like Fauci, Debbie Berg, Rochelle. I mean, we keep using this verb installed. These people were installed by the uniparty world government. I mean, you think Tony Fauci could make $500,000 a year as an IM doctor? There's no way.
No. They completely. I mean, I think that Trump. One of the flaws in Trump's personality is that he's a little too influenced by flattery, and I think they knew how to play that with him. Dr. Alexander, who wrote a book for about his experience in that clique. I forget his first name. He wrote a book for Skyhorse Publishing, where he was in with Fauci and Birx at the early stage of the pandemic. And he was not a political guy. He was not interested in politics. He was interested in immunology and actually studying what to do. And he recounts that Birx and Fauci took him under their confidence and basically revealed to him that they would just, if they could only get Trump to call for a lockdown, then we have him by the short and curlies.
Right.
And they were able to do it, and they celebrated it. And the only reason why they trusted Alexander was because he happened to be black, and he spoke with I think, a Jamaican accent. So they figured, oh, he's one of us.
One of us.
Yeah. So they basically let their guard down around him, and he got to see up close what was going on. But
well,
Trump
the
was,
other phenomenon that's in play here, and maybe this is why I'm different from a lot of people. One of my first jobs when I was in my 20s, I worked as a salesman for a particular electronics company that they don't exist anymore. They got bought out 2 or 3 times. And they had a science expert, quote unquote. And they would trot him out, and he was their genius for whatever the subject matter had to be.
mm-hmm.
And talking to this guy, and here I'm only, 23 years old, and this guy is 50, whatever he is. And I could tell pretty quickly that he had at his command all sorts of buzzwords, and he had a lot of very superficial general knowledge, but he didn't know really anything about anything. But he knew the social way of presenting himself as some sort of authority. And I think what happened with Alexander was he's now in the presence of the august Tony Fauci. And it's very hard for people to say that's why the fable exists. The emperor's new clothes. I'm sure it went through Alexander's head. Wait a minute. This guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Why is he here? But then you start doubting yourself. Is there something wrong with me?
Yeah, you know, these people are professional con men. I mean, you have them in every walk of life.
Yeah.
I mean, I could think of an example in my own when I was running for Congress, and I was actually in Washington at some Republican event. There was this guy there who was representing Islamic interests. Don't forget, this was right after 9/11.
Right.
And he was very slick. You know, he was very beautiful suit, and he had a great presence, and he was very charismatic, and he had people like, you know, eating out of his hand. I mean, he was like working the room. He didn't come anywhere near me because he could see that I knew what was going on. I mean, he could just tell that I wasn't but you know, I mean, you have those types. They know how to do, you know, they're expert at manipulating people's emotions, and they know how to present themselves. You know, you just have to watch for that. And I think that, I mean, unfortunately, Trump was, you know, he was a bit susceptible to that. I understand from people around him now that he's learned a lot from what's happened.
I hope so. I hope so.
I know. I don't think it's going to happen again. And if he should have been listening to somebody like a Peter Navarro, who would try to warn him about Fauci. I don't know why he didn't, but you know, there's a stubbornness about him.
Well, I think one of the things going on there, and it's good you mentioned Navarro, who now fell on his sword, unfortunately. I hope things work out for him.
Right.
But if you're Donald Trump and you've had a business background and you expect competency and you expect people at a high level to do their job, I think he assumed maybe, hey, you know, Tony Fauci's the head of NIAID. He's been there for how many years? The other problem is maybe he did wise up to the fact that essentially all these people were idiots. But my God, what are you going to do then? We're in the middle of a pandemic. What are the optics going to be if I fire all these morons that's not going to instill a lot of confidence in the people. So he
Right.
was really between a rock and a hard place. Now, you can ask yourself, well, maybe it's not his fault. Who was behind the fact that these posers like Francis Collins and Tony Fauci could have been around as long as they were? I mean, I think that's the sad part that
Yeah.
no one seems to want to address.
No, and it's look, Trump is by no means a perfect record, and I think that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made the point quite well that Trump's biggest mistake was his handling of the so-called pandemic, the
Right.
lockdowns, the refusal to promote ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which were being used by other nations very successfully. You know, there's a reason why certain nations in the world did not have the pandemic. You know, it wasn't an accident. And just the whole rotten business with the masking and the shutting down of schools. I mean, this is Trump deserves some blame for that, you know, and then not to mention the pushing of the vaccine. I don't want to get
Well,
into that because if I do, Mike, I'll be taken off of TikTok. We can't
well,
even
I don't
talk
want to
about
go
that.
into
Yeah,
that
we can't go
aspect,
into
but
that.
to be sympathetic to Trump for a moment, what if he, in his heart of hearts, he's sitting there in the Oval Office by himself, and he
Yeah.
comes to realization that all these public health people around him are morons, which is true, by the way.
Oh yeah. No.
What in the world do you do? All right, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Hey, Tony Fauci's a fraud. Debbie Burks is some idiot broad with wearing scarves all the time. I mean,
Right.
but what am I going to do now?
I look. I mean, it was a serious flaw in judgment, and you know, as uh, as Lucy used to say, and I love Lucy. He's got some splaining to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, but I, as I say, I mean, I think that the election is his for the taking, assuming that there isn't some incident like let's just put it this way: there's not the JFK solution. I don't want to say more, or there's not some kind of a major false flag that could come down the pike. These are very dangerous times. There's already talk about a new pandemic. You know, who knows what they're going to pull? They're going to do whatever they have to do to stop Trump, and it's a very scary time.
Well, it's very scary, but I try to reassure people that they're not very smart. They're going to use the same playbook. They're
They're
going to
already
try to
using
get
it.
off.
Already,
Um,
apparently, Senator Richard Blumenthal, denying Dick in Connecticut, is submitting legislation to change the power of the presidency as such that a president will not be allowed to respond to a quote insurrection unquote. Now I don't know exactly how that works, but Steve Bannon was talking about this. I heard Jack Posobiec talk about it. That basically the idea is that if Trump wins, and if the next day they unleash their shock troops, Antifa, BLM, and they start looting black businesses and burning black neighborhoods all over the country, like the Nazis did on Kristallnacht to the Jews, Trump is going to be tempted to call out the National Guard. And if he does, they'll impeach him because he will have violated this act. Now, I hope that Trump does not call out the National Guard. I hope that he handles it in the way that Warren G. Harding handled the exact same situation. Now, I know Harding has gone down in history as a bad president, but he really wasn't.
that's a
Harding,
whole topic, by the way, that we have to do sometime.
yeah, Harding in 1921 confronted a national coordinated strike against America's infrastructure, railroads, airports, you know, the whole bit, organized by communist unions. And it was all set to happen on the same day in that year. And the idea was that they were hoping that they would bait Harding into calling out the army, in which case then there would be a coup d'etat and there would have been a takeover. It was a very serious problem. But Harding responded by quietly contacting the governors, the local sheriffs, the local administrators. He had his people, and they handled it locally, each
Yeah.
state according to its own situation. And they were able to take apart these strikes one at a time in advance. They got people in the unions who were loyal to work with them, and they just did it right. They did it so that they pulled the rug out from under this conspiracy, and it was a conspiracy. And it was very quiet. Harding never got credit for it. Nobody really knows about it in history. But
Is
that's how
that
you
why?
handle.
Is
What?
that why they raised up this teapot dome nonsense?
Yeah,
As
to
sort
get
of a
rid of him and to attack him. Oh yeah, I mean that was, this was they did the Teapot Dome was the equivalent of what they did to Kennedy or what they tried to what they did to Nixon. We could talk about
Yeah.
that. The point is that Harding was not playing ball with the international establishment, and they took revenge. Harding had nothing to do with that. That was a whole different story. But the point is that he handled it in a way that hopefully Trump has some people around him who can manage it likewise if this happens. And it probably will happen. That it can be handled carefully and locally. Don't call out the National Guard. Don't overreact.
The National Guard is usually called out by the governor.
By the governors, so don't call out the army, I should say.
Yeah.
Don't overreact. Let the local authorities handle it and let them take responsibility for it and work as a sort of an advisory role. Don't get into it. Don't start to hit the streets. And I just hope Trump has that kind of discipline. I don't know if he does,
Well, I think
because either that or he's really going to step in it.
no, I think the good news is that they will try something like that. I suspect that there will be a lot of feds involved under the false flag. But the good news of that is that if something like that is tried, that may come to the end of the FBI.
It will if they handle it right.
Yeah.
And it will if Trump on day one gets rid of Wray and gets rid of some of these corrupt officials who are spying on American citizens and turning the FBI into the Gestapo, which I think that's what they're afraid of. That's why they're going to try to stop Trump, and it's scary. This is the whole country's at stake. Everybody knows that there's going to be some nasty stuff coming down. They apparently they're not going to have such an easy time putting him in jail. I think they're still working on that, but that doesn't that's out there, right? They still have these dates coming up where they're going to try to put him in prison for quote insurrection unquote.
Yeah.
But
It isn't going to work.
very perilous times.
It's perilous times, but again, the good news is they have no imagination. And they're getting foiled almost at every turn. Jack Smith came out with an outrageous motion for the defense. Please tell us what your strategy is. I've never heard of anything like that in my life. Obviously, the motion was denied. Fannie Willis is most likely
Big
going to
trouble, yeah.
be corrupt as hell. This
Yeah, it
absurd
all seems to be collapsing, but I mean, we'll have to see how corrupt the judiciary is, and some of these judges are real pieces of work.
Oh, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
Anyways, Mike, so what do you have coming up on your Substack?
The piece from a few days ago, which I mentioned last week, Save the Country, we take off from Laura Nero's song and talk about the idea of, quote, saving the country.
Yeah.
We go into a little bit of a song analysis, which actually I was complimented. I was involved in the music industry for many years. I knew some, quote, big name, and I got some great email about it saying, yeah, you really nailed it. And that wasn't necessarily the purpose of the piece, but talking about the perils of, quote, saving the country.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes a quick read. I link out to some good music. And just as an aside, I've noticed on my Substack and other writings I've done over the years, only a small percentage of people click the links.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why, but that's the fact. So
Right. But
Click the
people
link if you want to see the music. Hear the
click it if
music.
you want to hear the music. Yeah, definitely. Cool.
And good luck in New Hampshire. Are
Thank
you
you.
going to be doing live streaming from New Hampshire?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I can't imagine not doing that, especially if I encounter something interesting and worthwhile to stream. Anyways, again, briefly, shameless plug here: the Anti-Semitic Imagination.
I want
Available.
everybody to buy the book so it'll stop doing these plugs.
Thank you. Who knows? Anyway, so Mike, thanks as always for joining me, and talk to you next time. And thanks a lot.
All right.